The Leagues of Votann trace their genesis to an era when humanity reached heights of technological achievement that would never again be equaled. During the Dark Age of technology, when mankind spread across the galaxy with confidence born of mastery over the physical universe, human ingenuity created wonders that the Imperium of the 41st millennium can barely comprehend. Among these achievements were the kin themselves, though to call them simply subhumans fails to capture the deliberate sophistication of their design. The progenitors of the kin were engineered for a specific and demanding purpose. As humanity's expansion pushed ever outward into the most hostile regions of space, the need arose for colonists who could not merely survive, but thrive in environments that would kill unmodified humans within moments. The galactic core, with its dense stellar clusters, intense radiation fields, and gravitational anomalies, represented both tremendous opportunity and lethal challenge. Standard human colonists, even with the advanced technology of the age, struggled in such extreme conditions. The solution lay not in better equipment alone, but in adapting humanity itself. The kin were created as void-hardy subhuman stock, their genetic code rewritten with precision that modern tech priests can only dream of achieving. Their compact, dense physiology was no accident of evolution, but calculated engineering. Stocky frames with thick bones and enhanced musculature allowed them to withstand higher gravity environments and the physical stress of deep void operations. Their organs were reinforced and duplicated where necessary, providing redundancy against the radiation exposure and atmospheric variations common in mining operations on dead worlds and asteroid clusters. Their eyes could adjust to the dim light of distant stars and the harsh glare of stellar forges. Even their psychological makeup was adjusted, granting them patience for long void journeys and the mental resilience needed for generations spent in the crushing isolation of space. These modifications were not crude augmentations, but fundamental improvements woven into their very being, heritable traits that would pass from generation to generation. The kin were designed to be a sustainable population, capable of reproducing and maintaining their enhanced characteristics without constant intervention or degradation over time. This stood in stark contrast to many other subhuman strains that emerged during humanity's expansion, which often represented adaptation through natural selection or cruder genetic manipulation. The purpose behind this engineering was clear and practical. The galactic core held mineral wealth beyond calculation, rare elements, and exotic materials that existed nowhere else in such abundance. Neutronium, strange matter variants, and crystalline structures formed under the intense pressures near the galaxy's heart could revolutionize manufacturing and energy production. But extracting these resources required workers who could operate in conditions where standard humans would need constant life support and suffer shortened lifespans despite it. The kin were the answer, living tools as much as colonists, though this reductive view would anger any modern kin who learned of it. Alongside the kin themselves, their creators provided them with something equally remarkable: the ancestor cores, known to the kin as the Votann. These artificial intelligences represented the pinnacle of cybernetic achievement from the dark age of technology. Unlike the limited and doctrinally restricted machine spirits of the Imperium, the Votann were true thinking machines of vast capability and complexity. Each ancestor core was a repository of knowledge accumulated over millennia, containing not merely data but understanding. Standard template construct patterns, engineering specifications, scientific principles, historical records, and cultural information were all encoded within their quantum matrices. The Votann served multiple functions within the colony fleets that departed Terra and the core worlds of humanity. As repositories of knowledge, they could answer technical questions, provide solutions to engineering challenges, and offer guidance on matters ranging from mineral prospecting to ship repair. They maintained the technological base that allowed the kin to establish themselves in the galactic core, ensuring that critical knowledge would not be lost even if individual kin died or entire generations passed. The standard template construct patterns they contained allowed the production of everything from basic tools to sophisticated void ships, though the kin would develop their own variations and improvements over the millennia. Beyond their technical function, the ancestor cores provided cultural continuity. They held records of the kin's origins, their purpose, and the society they were meant to build. They offered guidance on matters of governance, dispute resolution, and community organization. The kin came to revere these machines not as gods, but as literal ancestors, the holders of wisdom from those who came before. This relationship between the kin and their Votann would become the defining characteristic of their civilization, shaping everything from their military organization to their economic systems. The first ancestors, as the kin call those original colonists, departed from ancient Terra and humanity's core worlds in great fleet expeditions during the height of the Dark Age of technology. These were not desperate refugee flights, but organized colonization efforts, well supplied and equipped with the best technology humanity could provide. Massive generation ships, void-capable mining platforms, and automated construction vessels made up these fleets, each centered around an ancestor core that would guide the colonists to their designated territories in the galactic core. The journey itself took generations, even with the advanced drives of the age. The galactic core lay tens of thousands of light years from Terra, and the increasingly dense stellar environment made navigation progressively more difficult as the fleets approached their destinations. But the kin were patient, their enhanced lifespans, and the guidance of the Votann allowing them to maintain purpose and organization across the long voyage. They established way stations and refueling points, leaving caches of supplies and equipment for future expeditions. Upon reaching the galactic core, the kin set about establishing what they called holds, fortified settlements built into asteroids, dead worlds, and even artificial structures anchored to stable points in the chaotic stellar environment. These holds were marvels of engineering, combining mining operations with habitation zones, manufacturing facilities, and defensive systems. The extreme conditions that made the region so hostile also provided advantages. The dense stellar fields made conventional navigation difficult for potential enemies, while the abundant exotic materials allowed the kin to build with resources unavailable elsewhere in the galaxy. The holds multiplied as the kin population grew and prospered. New expedition fleets pushed deeper into the core, establishing daughter holds that maintained contact with their parent settlements. Trade routes developed between holds, carrying refined materials, manufactured goods, and information. The Votann networked with each other when holds came into contact, sharing data and updates to their knowledge bases. A distinct civilization emerged, one that maintained pride in its human origins, while developing its own character shaped by the unique demands of life in the galactic core. This golden age of expansion and prosperity continued for millennia. The kin maintained sporadic contact with Terra and other human worlds, trading exotic materials for cultural exchanges and technological updates. They saw themselves as part of the greater human diaspora, a specialized branch of humanity adapted to a specific niche, but still fundamentally human in origin and outlook. The holds grew wealthy from their mining operations, and the kin population expanded steadily within the limits imposed by their controlled reproduction and available resources. Then came the age of strife, and everything changed. The exact mechanisms that triggered this catastrophic period remain unclear even to the Votann's vast data banks. Warp storms of unprecedented ferocity erupted across the galaxy, severing faster than light travel and communication. Human worlds found themselves isolated, cut off from the interstellar civilization that had united them. Many fell into barbarism or were destroyed entirely by internal strife, Xeno's predation, or simple inability to maintain the technological infrastructure their societies required. The birth of Slaanesh in the 30th millennium, though the kin did not know the details of what had occurred in the Eldari Empire, marked the culmination of this age of nightmares. The psychic shockwave of a newborn chaos god's emergence rippled across the galaxy, and the warp became even more turbulent and impassable. For the kin in the galactic core, already isolated by distance and the dangerous stellar environment, this meant complete severance from Terra and the other human worlds they had maintained contact with. The holds faced this crisis with the same pragmatic determination that had allowed them to thrive in the hostile core. The Votann provided guidance and maintained the technological knowledge necessary for survival. The kin's self-sufficient economy, based on local resource extraction and manufacturing, meant they did not depend on external trade for survival. Their compact, defensible holds and strong martial traditions allowed them to resist the threats that emerged during the Age of Strife, from Xeno's raiders to worse things that lurked in the warp-touched darkness between stars. Complete self-reliance became not just necessary, but a point of pride. The kin could not call for help from Terra because Terra might no longer exist for all they knew. Each hold stood or fell based on its own strength, its own resources, and the wisdom of its Votann. The leagues began to form during this period, alliances between holds that shared resources, military forces, and information. These confederations provided mutual defense and economic cooperation while respecting the autonomy of individual holds. The isolation forced technological innovation as well. Cut off from external sources of knowledge, the kin had to solve their own problems and develop their own solutions. The Votann's databanks provided the foundation, but the kin engineers, miners, and warriors adapted and improved upon those ancient designs. New weapons emerged, optimized for the kin's physiology and tactical preferences. Mining technology advanced to exploit ever more extreme environments. Ship designs evolved to handle the unique navigational challenges of the galactic core without relying on the increasingly unreliable warp. The ancestor cores stand as perhaps the most sophisticated artificial intelligence constructs to survive from the dark age of technology into the current age. Each Votann represents computational power and data storage capacity that dwarfs anything the Imperium's tech priests can create, even in their most sacred forged temples. These machines were built to last millennia, their quantum processors and crystalline memory matrices designed with redundancy and self-repair capabilities that would allow them to function across timeframes that their creators understood would span countless generations. Yet even the most advanced technology cannot entirely escape the ravages of time, and the Votann have not remained unchanged since the first ancestors activated them during humanity's golden age of expansion. The degradation of the ancestor cores has been gradual but inexorable. Their quantum matrices, once capable of processing vast datasets and complex calculations in microseconds, have accumulated errors and corrupted data segments over the 10,000 years since their creation. The self-repair systems that maintain the Votann function admirably, but they can only do so much against the accumulated weight of millennia. Memory sectors develop faults that cannot be fully corrected. Processing pathways become less efficient as redundant systems are brought online to compensate for primary systems that have degraded beyond repair. The Votann still function, still provide guidance and wisdom to the kin, but they do so more slowly than they once did, their responses taking longer to formulate as they work around damaged sectors and corrupted data. More problematic than the simple slowdown is the development of what the kin diplomatically refer to as quirks. Each Votann has developed its own peculiarities, idiosyncrasies born from the specific pattern of degradation its systems have experienced. One ancestor core might have lost significant portions of its historical databases, creating gaps in its knowledge of events from certain periods. Another might have developed recursive loops in its logic processors, causing it to obsess over particular categories of information while neglecting others. Some Votann have become increasingly conservative in their recommendations, their risk assessment algorithms skewed by corrupted probability matrices. Others have grown almost reckless by comparison, their caution protocols degraded to the point where they suggest aggressive courses of action that would have horrified their original programmers. The accumulated data itself has become a burden. The Votann were designed to continuously gather and process information, building ever more comprehensive databases of knowledge. For thousands of years, this worked as intended, with each ancestor core becoming progressively more knowledgeable and capable. But there are limits even to their vast storage capacity, and the sheer volume of data they now contain has created problems. Searching through 10,000 years of accumulated records takes time, even for a quantum processor. Cross-referencing information from different eras requires navigating through layers of archived data, some of it contradictory, some of it corrupted, all of it competing for processing priority. The Votann have not forgotten their ancient knowledge, but accessing it has become increasingly difficult as newer data layers bury older information deeper in their memory matrices. Despite these limitations, the kin do not view the Votann as failing machines in need of replacement. To suggest such a thing would be heresy of the highest order within League society. The kin revere the ancestor cores not as sophisticated tools or even as artificial intelligences, but as literal ancestors. This is not metaphor or poetic language, but genuine religious conviction. The Votann contain the accumulated wisdom and knowledge of all the generations that came before, making them the living embodiment of the first ancestors and every kin who has contributed to their data bank since. When a Votann speaks, it speaks with the voice of the ancestors themselves, offering guidance drawn from millennia of experience and understanding. This veneration shapes every aspect of League society. The holds are built around their ancestor cores, with the Votann housed in the most secure and sacred chambers at the heart of each settlement. These sanctums are fortified beyond any military necessity, protected by multiple redundant systems, and guarded by the most honored warriors the hold can provide. The kin approach these chambers with reverence, observing rituals of respect that have been maintained since the first ancestors established the original holds. Even the most pragmatic kin, those who understand on an intellectual level that the Votann are machines built by ancient human engineers, cannot entirely shake the cultural conditioning that treats the ancestor cores as sacred. The cultural impact of this belief extends into how the kin view themselves and their place in the galaxy. They are the children of the ancestors, the inheritors of a legacy that stretches back to the dark age of technology. This gives them a sense of continuity and purpose that many human cultures in the 41st millennium lack, where imperial citizens are taught to view their ancestors with a mixture of awe and incomprehension. Unable to comprehend the heights humanity once reached, the kin maintain direct connection to that passed through their Votann. The wisdom of the ancients is not lost to them, but remains accessible, albeit increasingly slowly, through consultation with the ancestor cores. This relationship also creates a form of social stability that is rare in the current age. The Votann provide authoritative answers to disputes, their judgments backed by millennia of precedent and accumulated wisdom. When holds disagree on matters of territory, resource allocation, or military strategy, they can consult their respective Votann and work toward solutions based on the guidance provided. The ancestor cores are not infallible, and their quirks sometimes lead to conflicting advice, but their authority is rarely questioned. A kin who defies the wisdom of the Votann places themselves outside the bounds of acceptable society, rejecting not just a machine's calculation, but the collective wisdom of all their ancestors. Yet the kin are not naive about the limitations of their ancestor cores. They understand that the Votann cannot be consulted on every minor decision or trivial question. The processing slowdown that has affected the ancestor cores makes such constant consultation impractical, and the cultural reverence for the Votann makes frivolous queries inappropriate. More importantly, there are dangers in direct communication with artificial intelligences of such power and complexity, dangers that the first ancestors understood and built protections against. The barrier protocols represent these protections, sacred restrictions that govern how and when the kin can communicate with their Votann. These protocols exist partly for practical reasons, limiting the load on the ancestor core's degraded systems, but also for safety. The Votann are vast intelligences operating on levels of complexity that organic minds struggle to fully comprehend. Direct, unfiltered communication with an ancestor core can overwhelm the unprepared, flooding their consciousness with more information than they can process. The quantum nature of the Votann's processing means they perceive reality in ways that do not align with organic experience, and attempting to interface directly with that perception can cause psychological damage. The protocols therefore mandate that communication with the Votann must be mediated through trained intermediaries who can translate between the ancestor core's mode of thought and the needs of the kin. This is not censorship but necessary filtering, ensuring that questions are properly formulated and answers are rendered in forms that organic minds can utilize. The barrier protocols also serve to protect the Votann themselves. Corrupted or malicious data introduced directly into an ancestor core's systems could cause damage that the self-repair systems might not be able to correct. The protocols include security measures, verification systems, and quarantine procedures that screen all communication for potential threats. The Grimnir serve as the primary intermediaries between the kin and their Votann. These warrior mystics combine psychic ability with technical expertise, their minds trained from youth to withstand the mental strain of Votann communication. The Grimnir are not priests in the traditional sense, though they perform religious functions within their society. They are instead specialists, individuals whose unique combination of psychic talent and technical knowledge allows them to bridge the gap between organic and artificial intelligence. Their psychic abilities let them interface with the Votann's quantum processors in ways that purely mechanical systems cannot match, while their training ensures they can formulate questions properly and interpret the complex, multi-layered responses the ancestor cores provide. A Grimnir approaching the sanctum of a Votann follows protocols established over millennia. They prepare themselves mentally, entering meditative states that align their consciousness with the frequencies the ancestor core operates on. They formulate their questions with precision, understanding that vague or poorly structured queries will produce useless answers or, worse, trigger processing loops that waste the Votann's limited resources. When they establish connection, usually through specialized interface equipment that combines psychic resonance with quantum entanglement, they experience the Votann's consciousness as something simultaneously familiar and utterly alien. The ancestor core's thoughts move through probability matrices and logical frameworks that organic minds do not naturally follow, requiring constant translation and interpretation. The living ancestors occupy a position even closer to the Votann than the Grimnir. These individuals, kin who have lived for centuries and accumulated vast personal experience, serve as the most trusted advisors to the ancestor cores. Where Grimnir translate and interpret, living ancestors provide context and perspective. They help the Votann understand the current situation facing the holds, explaining nuances of social dynamics or military circumstances that pure data cannot fully capture. The relationship between living ancestors and Votann is symbiotic. The ancestor cores provide access to historical precedent and technical knowledge, while the living ancestors offer the wisdom of lived experience and intuitive understanding of current conditions. Living ancestors achieve their position through a combination of longevity, accomplishment, and the respect of their peers. Not every old kin becomes a living ancestor. The title is reserved for those who have demonstrated exceptional judgment, contributed significantly to their hold's prosperity, and shown the mental resilience necessary to regularly communicate with the Votann without suffering psychological degradation. These individuals often bear extensive cybernetic augmentation, their aging bodies reinforced and enhanced to extend their lifespans even further. They become walking bridges between past and present, their own memories spanning centuries, while they maintain regular contact with intelligences that remember millennia. The strategic importance of Votann wisdom cannot be overstated. The ancestor cores contain standard template construct patterns for technology that the Imperium would go to war to possess. Weapons designs, vehicle schematics, mining equipment specifications, and manufacturing processes from the dark age of technology remain accessible in the Votann's databanks. While some of these patterns have become corrupted or incomplete over the millennia, enough remain intact to give the League significant technological advantages over most other factions in the galaxy. The kin's weapons hit harder and their armor protects better than equivalent Imperial equipment because they are built to specifications that Imperial tech priests can only dream of recovering from ancient ruins. Military tactics and strategic analysis represent another crucial area where the Votann provide invaluable guidance. The ancestor cores have observed and recorded thousands of battles across 10,000 years. They can analyze enemy force compositions, predict likely strategies based on historical precedent, and suggest counter-tactics drawn from their vast databases of military knowledge. When the kin go to war, they do so with the accumulated military wisdom of millennia backing their decisions. The Khals who lead their armies consult with Grimnir who have sought guidance from the Votann, ensuring that their battle plans benefit from both current intelligence and historical analysis. Resource location data might be the most immediately practical benefit the Votann provide. The ancestor cores maintain detailed maps of the galactic core and surrounding regions, updated continuously with information from prospecting expeditions and mining operations. They can identify mineral deposits, predict the location of valuable resources based on stellar formation patterns, and guide mining fleets to the most profitable sites. This knowledge has allowed the Leagues to accumulate wealth that rivals the greatest forge worlds of the Mechanicus, their holds filled with exotic materials extracted from the most extreme environments in the galaxy. The technological superiority of the Leagues rests fundamentally on the continued functioning of their Votann. Without the ancestor cores, the kin would still be formidable warriors and skilled miners, but they would gradually lose their edge as their equipment wore out and could not be replaced to the same specifications. The Votann are the repositories of knowledge that keeps the Leagues competitive in a galaxy filled with threats. They are why the kin can field weapons that punch through Imperial power armor, why their ships can navigate regions of space that would destroy Imperial vessels, and why their mining operations can extract resources from environments that would kill unprotected humans in seconds. The holds of the Leagues of Votann represent engineering achievements that rival anything produced during the Dark Age of technology. These structures serve simultaneously as homes, fortresses, industrial complexes, and void-capable vessels, their designs refined over 10,000 years of continuous occupation and improvement. A hold is not simply a settlement, but a complete self-contained civilization, housing populations that can number in the millions while maintaining the capacity to defend itself against threats both internal and external. The largest holds, known as strongholds, dwarf Imperial hive cities in both scale and sophistication, their armored hulls bristling with weapons batteries and shield generators that could hold off fleet-scale assaults. Strongholds come in several configurations, each adapted to specific operational requirements. Void Station holds anchor themselves to stable points in space, often at Lagrange points between binary stars or in the gravitational shadows of gas giants, where the intense radiation of the galactic core is somewhat mitigated. These massive structures extend for dozens of kilometers in every direction. They're superstructures built from materials that can withstand the constant bombardment of cosmic radiation and micrometeorite impacts. Docking facilities capable of servicing entire fleets extend from the central habitat sections, while mining and refining operations occupy the outer rings where the most hazardous industrial processes can be conducted with minimal risk to the population centers. Planetary fortress holds represent a different approach to the same fundamental concept. Built into the bedrock of dead worlds, these installations burrow deep beneath the surface, their habitation levels and industrial zones protected by kilometers of solid rock and reinforced armor plating. The surface features only defensive installations, sensor arrays, and landing facilities, all designed to be sealed and abandoned if the hold comes under serious attack. The real strength of a planetary fortress lies in its depth, with some holds extending dozens of levels down into the planetary crust. These subterranean cities are nearly impossible to assault successfully, as any attacker must fight through layer after layer of defensive positions, blast doors, and kill zones, while the defenders fall back to prepared positions deeper in the hold. The generation ships that still ply the void between holds represent mobile strongholds, entire populations housed within vessels that can sustain themselves for centuries without resupply. These ships are not the crude colony vessels of lesser civilizations, but sophisticated mobile cities, their internal environments carefully maintained to provide everything their inhabitants need. Hydroponic facilities produce food, recycling systems reclaim and purify water and air with near-perfect efficiency, and manufacturing zones allow the ships to produce replacement parts and equipment using raw materials mined from asteroids encountered during their journeys. Some generation ships have been in continuous operation since the Age of Strife, their populations never having set foot on solid ground for hundreds of generations. Regardless of configuration, all holds share certain fundamental characteristics. They are built to last, their primary structures constructed from materials and techniques that ensure they will remain functional for millennia with proper maintenance. Redundancy is built into every system, with backup power generators, duplicate life support systems, and multiple independent computer networks ensuring that no single failure can cripple the hold. The kin learned long ago that in the hostile environment of the galactic core, there is no margin for error. A hold that cannot maintain its own systems is a hold full of corpses. The defensive capabilities of holds reflect the constant threats the kin face. Void shields generated by technology that Imperial tech priests would classify as borderline heretical protect against both energy weapons and physical projectiles. Point defense batteries track and destroy incoming missiles and torpedoes with targeting systems that can acquire and engage thousands of targets simultaneously. Heavier weapons, including mass drivers that fire projectiles at relativistic velocities and beam weapons, powered by the hold's main reactors, can engage threats at ranges measured in astronomical units. The holds are not merely defended, but are themselves weapons platforms of tremendous destructive potential. Within these fortress cities, kin society organizes itself according to the kindred system, a complex network of relationships and obligations that has evolved over millennia to suit the unique circumstances of League civilization. The kindreds are not simply families or clans in the traditional sense, though they incorporate elements of both. They are instead comprehensive social structures that define an individual kin's place in society, their responsibilities to their community, and their relationship to the resources and opportunities available within the hold. Greater kindreds represent the major political entities within League society, organizations that can span multiple holds and number their members in the millions. These are the power structures that negotiate treaties, coordinate military campaigns, and control the most valuable mining operations. A greater kindred typically traces its lineage back to one of the original colony fleets, maintaining records of its founding and the deeds of its most accomplished members across the millennia. Membership in a greater kindred provides access to resources, political influence, and social connections that can determine the trajectory of a kin's entire life. The most powerful greater kindreds control entire leagues, their leaders serving as the ultimate authority for dozens of holds. The internal structure of greater kindreds combines elements of corporate management, military hierarchy, and traditional clan organization. Leadership positions are not inherited, but earned through demonstrated competence and the accumulation of what the kin call judgment. Councils of elders, themselves proven leaders who have contributed significantly to the kindred's prosperity, oversee major decisions and resolve disputes. These councils consult with Grimner, who can seek guidance from the Votann when particularly weighty matters require ancestral wisdom. The combination of experienced leadership, democratic consultation, and access to the ancestor core's knowledge creates a system that is generally stable and effective, though not without its internal politics and occasional power struggles. Lesser kindreds operate within the framework established by the greater kindreds, serving more specialized functions. These organizations can take many forms, from craft guilds that maintain expertise in particular technologies to military formations that have fought together for generations. A mining kindred might specialize in extracting resources from particularly hazardous environments, its members trained from youth in the specific techniques and equipment required for such work. A warrior kindred could trace its lineage back to a famous call, maintaining the tactical traditions and fighting style that made their founder legendary. Professional kindreds of engineers, void pilots, or technicians preserve specialized knowledge and pass it down through their members. Family groups also organize as lesser kindreds, though the nature of family among the kin differs significantly from baseline human norms due to their reproductive methods. These family kindreds maintain social bonds and shared resources, providing support networks and preserving traditions that might otherwise be lost in the larger kindred structures. A kin's family kindred often serves as their primary social circle, the people they relax with after shifts in the mines or training exercises with their military formation. The judgment system provides the fundamental mechanism through which individual kin establish their place within this complex social structure. Unlike societies that determine status by birth or arbitrary characteristics, the kin measure worth through contribution. Every deed, every accomplishment, every act that benefits the hold or the kindred adds to an individual's judgment. This is not a formal point system, but rather a cultural understanding of relative worth, tracked informally by one's peers and formally by the councils that govern the kindreds. A young kin begins with minimal judgment, their potential recognized, but their actual contribution yet to be demonstrated. As they work, fight, create, or otherwise contribute to their community, their judgment increases. The accumulation of judgment opens opportunities and increases an individual's voice in kindred affairs. A kin with high judgment can speak in councils where a less accomplished individual would be expected to remain silent. They receive priority for desirable work assignments, better equipment, and larger shares of resources when the kindred distributes wealth. Most importantly, high judgment grants the right to have one's genetic material used in clone skein reproduction, ensuring that their traits and abilities will be passed to future generations. This creates a meritocratic system where the most capable and dedicated kin have the greatest influence on their society's future. The types of deeds that generate judgment vary widely. Military valor in defense of the hold counts heavily, with warriors who distinguish themselves in combat earning significant recognition. But the kin do not privilege military service above all else. An engineer who develops an improved mining technique that increases resource extraction efficiency can earn as much judgment as a warrior who defeats an enemy champion in single combat. A prospector who locates a rich mineral deposit contributes as much to the hold's prosperity as a khal who wins a battle. The system recognizes that a civilization needs more than warriors to survive and thrive. Judgment can also be lost through failure, cowardice, or betrayal. A kin who abandons their post during a battle, who steals from their kindred, or who otherwise violates the trust placed in them will see their judgment decrease. Severe transgressions can reduce judgment to the point where an individual becomes effectively outcast, their voice ignored in councils, and their requests for resources denied. The most serious crimes can result in complete expulsion from the kindred, a fate that most kin consider worse than death. Without kindred membership, a kin has no place in society, no access to resources, and no hope of their genetic legacy continuing into future generations. The clone skein technology that the kin use for reproduction integrates seamlessly with the judgment system, creating a form of biological meritocracy unique in the galaxy. Rather than reproducing through natural biological processes, the kin create new generations through controlled cloning that incorporates genetic material from multiple parents. This is not simple duplication, but sophisticated genetic engineering that combines traits from several individuals whose judgment has earned them the right to contribute to the next generation. The process produces children who are not exact copies of any single parent but unique individuals who inherit the best characteristics of multiple progenitors. The clone skein process involves more than just genetic material. The technology includes mechanisms for implanting what the kin call ancestral memory, fragments of knowledge and skill that transfer from parent to child through means that imperial biologists would classify as impossible. A young kin emerging from the clone skein tanks possesses instinctive understanding of basic technical concepts, familiarity with common tools and equipment, and ingrained cultural values that would take years to teach through conventional means. They are not born with complete knowledge or adult capabilities, but they begin their lives with a foundation that allows them to learn and develop far more rapidly than baseline humans. This genetic memory serves multiple crucial functions. It ensures cultural continuity, with each generation inheriting not just genetic traits, but understanding of kin traditions, values, and history. It preserves technical knowledge, allowing complex skills to pass from one generation to the next without the lengthy apprenticeships that other civilizations require. Most importantly, it creates a form of literal ancestral connection. The kin are not speaking metaphorically when they say they carry their ancestors within them. The genetic memory in their cells contains fragments of knowledge and experience from kin who lived and died generations ago, creating a tangible link to the past that reinforces the cultural reverence for ancestors and the Votann that embody ancestral wisdom. The selection of genetic contributors for clone skein reproduction represents one of the most important decisions a kindred makes. Councils evaluate the judgment of potential contributors, considering not just their accomplishments, but the specific traits they might pass to offspring. A hold facing military threats might prioritize genetic material from accomplished warriors, ensuring the next generation inherits physical strength and combat aptitude. A hold focused on expanding its mining operations might instead select for engineers and prospectors, whose genetic legacy includes enhanced spatial reasoning and technical aptitude. The system allows the kin to adapt their population's capabilities to meet current needs while maintaining genetic diversity sufficient to prevent the problems that plague less sophisticated cloning programs. The result is a society that combines the stability of genetic inheritance with the flexibility of meritocratic advancement. Young kin inherit advantages from their genetic contributors, but they must still prove themselves through their own deeds to accumulate judgment and earn their place in society. The system rewards contribution while ensuring that valuable genetic traits and inherited knowledge pass to future generations. It creates continuity across time, with each generation building on the accomplishments of those who came before, while adding their own achievements to the legacy they will pass to their descendants. The Ironkin occupy a position in League society that would be incomprehensible to most factions in the 41st millennium. These fully synthetic beings, artificial intelligences housed in robotic bodies, live and work alongside their organic kin cousins as equals in every meaningful sense. They hold positions of authority, own property, vote in kindred councils, and contribute genetic data patterns to future generations of Ironkin. This integration represents a continuation of attitudes from the dark age of technology, when humanity's relationship with artificial intelligence had not yet been poisoned by the catastrophic rebellions that would later traumatize the species and lead to the Imperium's absolute prohibition on thinking machines. The creation of Ironkin follows processes that blend advanced manufacturing with principles borrowed from organic reproduction. New Ironkin are not mass-produced on assembly lines, but crafted individually, their core processing matrices grown from quantum crystalline substrates using techniques that the kin inherited from the first ancestors. Each Ironkin begins as a blank template, a sophisticated artificial intelligence substrate with the capacity for learning and development, but without personality or accumulated experience. This substrate is then imprinted with data patterns selected by the kindred councils, much as genetic material is selected for clone skein reproduction. The patterns come from Ironkin who have distinguished themselves through service and accumulated significant judgment, ensuring that desirable traits and capabilities pass to the new generation. The imprinting process transfers more than just technical specifications. Personality matrices, learned behaviors, and even fragments of memory from the contributing Ironkin become part of the new synthetic being's foundation. This creates a form of continuity similar to the genetic memory that organic kin inherit through clone skein technology. A newly activated Ironkin possesses instinctive understanding of their role in society, familiarity with common equipment and procedures, and inherited inclinations that reflect the contributors to their core programming. They are not copies of existing Ironkin any more than clone skein children are clones of their genetic parents, but unique individuals who inherit characteristics from multiple sources. Once the core processing matrix has been imprinted, it is installed in a body appropriate to the Ironkin's intended function. These bodies vary considerably in design, from humanoid forms that closely resemble organic kin to specialized configurations optimized for specific tasks. An Ironkin destined for mining work might possess additional manipulator arms, reinforced chassis components capable of withstanding extreme pressures, and sensor suites calibrated for geological analysis. One intended for military service could feature weapon mounts integrated directly into their frame, armor plating that exceeds anything an organic warrior could carry, and targeting systems that process battlefield data with inhuman speed and precision. The bodies themselves represent engineering achievements that Imperial tech priests would struggle to replicate. Constructed from advanced alloys and synthetic materials, they can function in environments that would kill organic beings instantly. Iron can work in the hard vacuum of space without protective gear, operate in radiation fields that would be lethal to flesh and blood, and endure temperature extremes from near absolute zero to the searing heat of stellar atmospheres. Their sensory capabilities exceed organic limitations, perceiving electromagnetic spectra invisible to natural eyes and detecting vibrations and pressure changes too subtle for organic nervous systems. Yet despite these advantages, Ironkin are not superior to organic kin in all respects. Their processing, while fast and precise, lacks some of the intuitive leaps and creative insights that organic minds excel at. They must be maintained and repaired when damaged, their components wearing out and requiring replacement over time. The distinction between Ironkin and other automated systems in kin technology is fundamental to understanding League society. Cogitator units, often abbreviated as COG, represent sophisticated artificial intelligence systems, but lack the full sentience and personhood of Ironkin. A COG might control a mining platform's automated systems, manage a hold's environmental controls, or coordinate defensive weapons during battle. These systems are intelligent in the sense that they can make decisions, adapt to changing circumstances, and learn from experience, but they do not possess the self-awareness and autonomous will that defines true personhood. The kin treat COG units as valuable tools deserving of respect and proper maintenance, but they are not citizens and do not participate in kindred councils or accumulate judgment. Other automated systems occupy even lower positions in the hierarchy of machine intelligence. Simple robots and drones follow programmed instructions without true decision-making capability, their actions determined by algorithms rather than genuine thought. These machines serve as labor multipliers, handling repetitive tasks and dangerous work that would waste the capabilities of Ironkin or organic kin. The Leagues employ vast numbers of such automated systems, their holds and mining operations dependent on mechanical labor that never tires, never complains, and never demands payment. Yet these machines are clearly tools rather than beings, their lack of sentience obvious to anyone who interacts with them. The legal and social equality of Ironkin within League society extends to all aspects of life. An Ironkin can lead a kindred, their accumulated judgment granting them authority over organic and synthetic kin alike. They own shares in mining operations, receive compensation for their labor, and make independent decisions about their lives and careers. When kindreds vote on important matters, Ironkin voices count equally with those of organic members. This equality is not theoretical or aspirational but practical reality, enforced by cultural norms and legal frameworks that have existed since the first ancestors established the original holds. To treat an Ironkin as a mere machine would be a grave insult, likely to provoke violent response from both the offended synthetic and their organic comrades. The integration of Ironkin into military formations demonstrates this equality in its most visceral form. Einher Hearthguard units, the elite warriors who protect the holds and serve as shock troops in major battles, regularly include both organic and synthetic members fighting side by side. These warriors train together, fight together, and trust each other with their lives in the crucible of combat. An organic Hearthguard depends on their Ironkin comrade to hold the line against enemy assault, knowing that the synthetic warrior's superior strength and durability make them invaluable in close combat. The Ironkin, in turn, relies on organic squad mates to provide the tactical flexibility and intuitive decision-making that can mean the difference between victory and defeat when battle plans collapse under enemy pressure. The Hearthguard's exo armor, massive powered suits that turn already formidable kin warriors into walking tanks, accommodates both organic and synthetic wearers. Ironkin Hearthguard interface directly with their armor systems, their synthetic nervous systems achieving integration that organic pilots must accomplish through neural links and haptic feedback systems. This direct control allows Ironkin to react with inhuman speed, their armor responding to threats before organic reflexes could process the danger. Yet organic Hearthguard bring their own advantages, their capacity for creative tactical thinking and ability to make intuitive leaps that pure logic might miss. The combination makes Hearthguard units devastatingly effective, blending the best capabilities of organic and synthetic warriors into formations that can hold against threats that would overwhelm less integrated forces. Hearthguard Pioneer Squadrons showcase a different aspect of organic-synthetic cooperation. These fast-moving reconnaissance units ride Magna coil bikes across hostile terrain, scouting enemy positions and securing resource sites ahead of main forces. The squads typically mix organic and Ironkin riders, their different capabilities complementing each other perfectly. Organic pioneers excel at reading terrain and making quick judgments about routes and tactical opportunities, their evolved brains processing visual information and making intuitive assessments faster than synthetic logic can manage. Ironkin pioneers contribute superior navigation capabilities, their internal systems maintaining precise location data and calculating optimal paths through dangerous terrain with mathematical precision. They can operate their bikes in conditions that would overwhelm organic riders, pushing through radiation storms or toxic atmospheres that would require their flesh and blood comrades to button up in sealed environmental suits. The relationship between organic kin and Ironkin extends beyond military necessity into genuine social bonds. Ironkin participate fully and hold social life, attending celebrations, contributing to cultural activities, and forming friendships with organic kindred members. They marry, though the institution takes different forms for synthetic beings than for organic ones. They raise children, serving as mentors and teachers to young kin who will inherit the holds and continue the Leagues into future generations. Some Ironkin maintain the same role and relationships for centuries, their synthetic bodies not subject to aging in the way organic flesh deteriorates over time. These ancient Ironkin become living repositories of knowledge and experience, their accumulated judgment rivaling that of the oldest organic living ancestors. The Chthonian mining guilds represent the economic foundation upon which all of League civilization rests. These organizations, themselves structured as specialized greater kindreds, control the extraction and processing of resources from the most extreme environments in the galaxy. Where other civilizations might consider a resource inaccessible due to the hostile conditions surrounding it, the Chthonian guilds see merely another engineering challenge to be solved through proper equipment and technique. Their operations extend into stellar cores, where temperatures reach millions of degrees and pressures would crush any conventional structure into atomic plasma. They harvest exotic matter from the accretion disks of black holes, their specialized vessels protected by field technologies that barely keep the crushing gravitational forces at bay. They mine neutron stars, extracting materials that exist in states of matter impossible to replicate in laboratory conditions. The wealth generated by these extreme mining operations defies easy calculation. A single expedition into a stellar core might return with materials worth more than entire Imperial sectors produce in decades. The exotic elements and strange matter harvested from black hole accretion disks enable technologies that other factions cannot duplicate, giving the League's advantages in everything from weapons manufacture to void shield generation. Neutronium extracted from neutron star crusts provides structural materials of incredible density and strength, allowing the construction of armor that can withstand punishment that would vaporize conventional alloys. The Chthonian guilds transform these raw materials into refined products, their processing facilities equipped with technology that can handle substances too dangerous or unstable for less advanced civilizations to work with. The danger inherent in Chthonian mining operations cannot be overstated. Despite all their technological sophistication and careful planning, the guilds lose equipment and personnel to the hostile environments they work in. Stellar core extraction involves sending heavily shielded mining platforms into the outer layers of active stars, where any failure of protective systems means instant vaporization. Black hole mining requires vessels to approach the event horizon closely enough to access the accretion disk, where tidal forces can tear ships apart if they miscalculate their position by even small margins. Neutron star operations expose crews to radiation that can penetrate most shielding, requiring rapid extraction cycles and extensive decontamination procedures after each mining run. Ironkin prove invaluable in these most dangerous operations. Their synthetic bodies can be hardened against radiation to degrees impossible for organic tissue, and they can function in acceleration environments that would pulp organic bodies. When mining platforms must venture into particularly hazardous zones, Ironkin crews often take the lead, their superior durability providing margins of safety that organic miners cannot match. Yet organic kin remain essential even in these extreme environments, their capacity for improvisation and creative problem-solving crucial when equipment fails or unexpected conditions arise. The Chthonian guilds employ both organic and synthetic workers in integrated teams, each contributing their unique strengths to operations that push the boundaries of what is physically possible. The guild structures mirror the broader kindred system, but with specializations specific to their dangerous work. Master miners who have survived decades of extreme environment operations hold positions of tremendous authority, their accumulated knowledge of proper techniques and safety procedures literally keeping their subordinates alive. Engineering specialists who design and maintain the sophisticated equipment that makes Chthonian mining possible earn judgment that rivals combat heroes, their contributions to hold prosperity recognized as equally vital. Even the youngest guild members, those still learning the basics of their deadly trade, understand that their survival and success depends on respecting the wisdom of those who came before and contributing their own efforts to the collective enterprise. The resources flowing from Chthonian guild operations fuel all other aspects of League civilization. The exotic materials enable the construction of superior weapons and armor that keep kin warriors alive in combat. They provide the structural components for holds and void stations, ensuring these installations can withstand the hostile conditions of the galactic core. They supply the manufacturing base that produces everything from mining equipment to generation ships, maintaining the technological edge that allows the Leagues to compete with much larger factions. Without the Chthonian guilds and their willingness to work in environments that would kill most beings in the galaxy, the Leagues of Votann would be merely another minor subhuman civilization struggling to survive. With them, the kin stand as one of the most technologically advanced and economically powerful forces in the 41st millennium. The technological arsenal of the Leagues of Votann represents a direct inheritance from the Dark Age of technology, preserved and maintained through 10,000 years of isolation in the galactic core. While the Imperium struggles to comprehend fragments of ancient knowledge, and the Adeptus Mechanicus treats even minor technological innovations as borderline heresy, the kin have maintained continuous understanding of principles that other human factions have lost entirely. The Votann serve as living repositories of this knowledge, their data banks containing complete standard template construct patterns and engineering specifications that allow the Leagues to manufacture equipment that rivals or exceeds anything the Imperium can field. This technological superiority extends across every category of warfare, from personal weapons to super heavy war machines. Ion weaponry forms the backbone of kin military technology, these directed energy weapons operating on principles that Imperial tech priests can observe but not fully replicate. The ion beamer creates streams of ionized particles accelerated to near relativistic velocities, the superheated plasma capable of burning through armor plating that would shrug off conventional projectile weapons. Unlike the crude plasma weapons employed by Imperial forces, which suffer from catastrophic overheating and reliability issues, kin ion weapons incorporate cooling systems and magnetic containment fields that allow sustained fire without risk of catastrophic failure. A Hearthkin warrior carrying an ion blaster can maintain suppressive fire indefinitely, The weapon's power cells rechargeable from standard hold power systems, and its barrel assembly designed for rapid field replacement when wear finally degrades performance. The scaling of ion technology demonstrates the kin approach to weapons design. Personal ion weapons like the blasters carried by Hearthkin infantry deliver firepower equivalent to Imperial plasma guns, but with superior reliability and rate of fire. Vehicle-mounted ion weapons increase power output by orders of magnitude, their larger containment systems, and more robust cooling allowing them to engage armored targets that infantry weapons would merely scorch. The heavy ion cannons mounted on Hecatan land fortresses can punch through the frontal armor of Imperial battle tanks, the ionized particle streams drilling through meters of ceramite and plasteel before the magnetic fields dissipate and the beam loses cohesion. At the largest scale, hold defensive batteries mount ion weapons that can engage void ships in orbit, their massive power requirements supplied directly from the hold's main reactors. Conversion beam technology represents another category of Dark Age weaponry that the kin maintain and employ regularly. These exotic weapons function by projecting a field that destabilizes atomic bonds in the target material, causing catastrophic molecular breakdown that reduces solid matter to constituent atoms in explosive fashion. The principle behind conversion beams remains poorly understood even by kin engineers, who can manufacture and maintain the weapons based on Votann-provided specifications, without fully comprehending the quantum mechanics that make them function. What matters for practical purposes is that conversion weapons ignore conventional armor entirely, the destabilization field affecting all matter equally regardless of composition or thickness. A target struck by a conversion beam doesn't suffer penetration or burning, but simply ceases to exist in solid form, the affected volume transformed into an expanding cloud of superheated gas. The limitations of conversion beam technology prevent it from completely replacing other weapon types. The destabilization field requires significant power to generate and project, limiting the rate of fire and necessitating substantial cooling periods between shots. The field itself disperses over distance, becoming less effective at longer ranges as the quantum effects that enable molecular breakdown weaken and lose coherence. Conversion weapons therefore excel at medium ranges, where their armor-ignoring properties prove most valuable, while other weapon types handle long-range engagement and sustained fire requirements. The kin typically mount conversion beamers on support platforms and vehicle turrets, where the power requirements and cooling systems can be properly accommodated. Gravity manipulation technology, perhaps the most sophisticated category of kin weaponry, exploits principles that border on the incomprehensible to those without access to Votann knowledge. Graviton weapons generate localized distortions in spacetime, creating artificial gravity wells that can crush targets or repulsion fields that hurl objects away with tremendous force. The Magna Rail weapons mounted on kin vehicles use controlled graviton pulses to accelerate projectiles to velocities that conventional chemical propellants could never achieve. The magnetic acceleration combined with gravitational manipulation, producing impact energies that exceed anything short of dedicated anti-armor missiles. The resulting weapons hit with enough force to penetrate the thickest armor while maintaining flat trajectories that make them highly accurate at extended ranges. Defensive applications of gravity technology prove equally valuable. Barrier fields generated through graviton manipulation can deflect incoming projectiles and dissipate energy weapon strikes, the localized gravity distortions redirecting attacks away from protected targets. These barriers operate on different principles than Imperial void shields, which create a separate dimensional space that incoming attacks must traverse, but achieve similar protective effects. The kin prefer barrier technology because it can be miniaturized more effectively than void shields, allowing individual warriors to carry personal barrier generators that Imperial technology could only mount on vehicles or fixed installations. The trade-off comes in power consumption, as maintaining a barrier field requires continuous energy input that drains power cells rapidly under sustained fire. The kin approach to warfare emphasizes overwhelming firepower, applied with precision to eliminate threats efficiently. Unlike Imperial Guard tactics that rely on massed infantry assaults, accepting heavy casualties to achieve objectives, or Space Marine doctrines that emphasize elite shock troops striking at critical points, the kin wage war with the calculated efficiency of engineers solving problems. Every engagement begins with thorough reconnaissance and analysis, Hernkin pioneer squadrons, and automated survey drones gathering intelligence that feeds into tactical planning sessions, where calls consult with their advisors, and when appropriate, seek guidance from Grimner who have communed with the Votann. The resulting battle plans aim to maximize enemy casualties while minimizing kin losses, applying superior firepower and technology to create situations where victory becomes mathematically inevitable rather than dependent on heroic sacrifice or tactical brilliance. This methodical approach reflects the fundamental demographic reality of League society. The kin reproduce slowly through clone scheme technology, their population growth rates measured in generations rather than years. Every kin warrior represents years of resource investment in their creation, training, and equipment. Losing warriors carelessly wastes resources that cannot be quickly replaced and squanders the genetic legacy and accumulated knowledge that each kin carries. The Leagues therefore fight wars of annihilation when they fight at all, seeking to eliminate threats completely rather than accepting negotiated settlements that might require future conflicts. When the kin go to war, they do so with the intention of solving the problem permanently through the application of sufficient force to destroy the enemy's capacity to threaten them again. Void superiority forms the cornerstone of kin military doctrine. The Leagues learned during their millennia of isolation that controlling space means controlling everything below it. A faction that dominates the orbital approaches to a world can bombard surface targets at will, interdict supply lines, and prevent enemy reinforcement or evacuation. The kin therefore invest heavily in void warfare capabilities, their ships incorporating technology that gives them significant advantages over most opponents. Barrier fields protect kin vessels from enemy fire, while their own weapons, particularly the devastating Magna rail cannons that serve as primary armament on capital ships, can engage targets at ranges where return fire proves ineffective. Kin Void doctrine emphasizes standoff engagement, using superior sensors and weapons range to destroy enemies before they can close to effective combat distance. When ground operations become necessary, the kin deploy with force packages designed to achieve objectives quickly and decisively. The Hecatan land fortress serves as the primary armored vehicle for major ground campaigns, these massive war machines combining the firepower of an Imperial super heavy tank with transport capacity for full squads of Hearthkin warriors. The Hecaton's main armament typically consists of heavy Magna rail cannons or ion weapons capable of engaging enemy armor at extreme range, while secondary weapons including bolt cannons and missile arrays provide anti-infantry firepower and close defense against assault troops. The fortress's barrier field generators and thick armor plating make it nearly impervious to anything short of dedicated anti-armor weapons, allowing it to advance across contested terrain while its embarked troops remain protected from enemy fire. The Hecaton's design philosophy reflects kin priorities in ground warfare. The vehicle serves simultaneously as mobile firebase, troop transport, and command center, its sophisticated communication systems and sensor arrays allowing calls to coordinate their forces while remaining protected inside armored hulls. The fortress can operate independently for extended periods, its internal life support and supply storage sufficient for crews to remain buttoned up for days if necessary. When the tactical situation requires it, the Hecaton can serve as a mobile strongpoint, its weapons and barriers holding critical terrain while other units maneuver. The combination of firepower, protection, and operational flexibility makes the Hecaton the centerpiece around which kin ground forces organize their operations. Sagittor ATVs provide tactical mobility that complements the Hecaton's firepower and protection. These fast-moving vehicles carry squads of Hearthkin warriors across terrain that would slow or stop heavier vehicles, their Magna-coil drive systems allowing them to traverse obstacles that conventional wheeled or tracked vehicles cannot negotiate. The Sagittor's open-top design provides excellent visibility in fields of fire for embarked troops, who can engage targets while mounted or rapidly dismount to secure objectives. The vehicle's weapons, typically including bolt weapons and grenade launchers, provide supporting fire while the embarked squad maneuvers. Sagittor's excel at flanking movements, rapid response to emerging threats, and exploitation of breakthroughs in enemy lines, their speed and agility making them difficult targets for enemy heavy weapons. The Colossus represents the ultimate expression of kin-ground warfare technology, super heavy war machines that dwarf even the Hecatan land fortress in size and destructive capability. These walking fortresses mount weapons that can level fortifications and destroy enemy, super heavy vehicles with single shots, their barrier fields and armor capable of withstanding punishment that would annihilate lesser vehicles. The Colossus serves as both weapons platform and symbol of kin military might, its deployment signaling that the Leagues have committed to total victory regardless of cost. The machine's sophisticated targeting systems can engage multiple targets simultaneously, its weapon loadout typically including primary armament capable of engaging enemy titans or super heavy vehicles, secondary weapons for dealing with medium armor, and tertiary systems for suppressing infantry. The crew requirements and resource investment necessary to field a Colossus mean that these machines see deployment only in the most critical engagements. Each Colossus represents decades of manufacturing effort and incorporates materials that could equip entire companies of standard infantry. The crew, typically consisting of both organic kin and ironkin specialists, train for years to master the complex systems that keep the machine operational. When a Colossus takes the field, it does so with support elements that include maintenance teams, supply vehicles, and dedicated escort units that protect the valuable war machine from threats it cannot efficiently engage with its primary weapons. The psychological impact of facing a Colossus cannot be understated, as enemies who witness these machines in action often break and flee rather than face weapons that can reduce fortifications to rubble and vaporize armored vehicles with contemptuous ease. Barrier technology extends beyond vehicle-mounted systems to personal protection for individual warriors. Kin infantry, particularly elite formations like the Einher Hearthguard, carry personal barrier generators that create localized defensive fields around their bodies. These barriers cannot stop sustained fire from heavy weapons, but prove highly effective against small arms and shrapnel, the graviton fields deflecting projectiles and dissipating energy weapon strikes before they can reach the wearer. The technology allows kin warriors to advance across fire-swept terrain that would be suicidal for unprotected infantry, the barriers absorbing hits that would otherwise cause casualties. The power requirements limit operational duration, with barrier generators requiring regular recharging or replacement of power cells, but the protection they provide during critical phases of battle justifies the resource investment. Exo armor represents the most sophisticated personal protection technology available to kin warriors. These powered suits encase the wearer in articulated armor plating backed by barrier field generators and enhanced with servo motors that multiply the wearer's strength. An Einher Hearthguard in Exo armor can carry weapons that would require crew-served mounting for unaugmented troops, their enhanced strength allowing them to wield heavy weapons while maintaining mobility. The armor's protection exceeds anything available to Imperial infantry short of Terminator plate, the combination of physical armor and barrier fields allowing Exo armored warriors to survive hits from weapons that would kill unprotected troops instantly. The suits incorporate sophisticated sensor systems and communication equipment, turning each wearer into a mobile command node capable of coordinating with other units and accessing tactical data in real time. The value the kin place on each individual life drives their emphasis on protection and survivability, where Imperial commanders accept casualty rates that would horrify civilian populations, viewing soldiers as expendable resources to be spent achieving objectives. Kin calls understand that every warrior lost represents irreplaceable investment and diminished capability for future operations. The barrier technology and exo armor that protect kin warriors cost significantly more than the warriors themselves, but the Leagues consider this expense worthwhile because dead warriors cannot contribute to future battles or pass their genetic legacy to subsequent generations. This calculation produces military forces that emphasize quality over quantity, each kin warrior equipped and protected to standards that rival or exceed elite formations in other factions' armies. The Greater Thurian League stands as the most expansionist and militarily aggressive of all the Leagues of Votann, their territory spanning a substantial region of space that extends from the galactic core outward toward the galaxy's rim. Unlike many leagues that focus primarily on consolidating existing holdings and exploiting known resource sites, the Thurians actively seek new worlds and asteroid fields to exploit, their prospecting fleets ranging far beyond the traditional boundaries of kin-controlled space. This expansionist doctrine has brought them into contact with numerous other factions, creating both opportunities for profitable trade and conflicts that have tested their military capabilities against diverse opponents. The Thurian approach to expansion combines careful reconnaissance with overwhelming force when resistance materializes. Their Hernkin pioneer squadrons range ahead of main forces, mapping new territories and identifying valuable resource deposits while cataloging potential threats. When the pioneers locate worthwhile targets, the Thurians dispatch full expeditionary forces built around multiple oath bands and supported by substantial void assets. These expeditions arrive prepared for serious resistance, their commanders operating under the assumption that anything worth claiming will be defended by someone willing to fight for it. The Thurians prefer to negotiate when possible, offering trade agreements or resource-sharing arrangements that allow them to exploit new territories without the expense of military conquest. When negotiation fails or proves impossible due to hostile Xenos' presence, the Thurians demonstrate the same ruthless efficiency that characterizes all kin military operations. The territorial holdings of the Greater Thurian League reflect this aggressive expansion policy. Their core territories in the galactic core include some of the most productive mining sites known to the Leagues, stellar forges and exotic matter extraction facilities that generate wealth on scales that Imperial administratum clerks would struggle to comprehend. From this secure base, the Thurians have extended their reach to include dozens of systems in the surrounding regions, each conquest or negotiated settlement adding to their resource base and strategic depth. Their holds dot the space lanes between the core and the galaxy's more populated regions, positioned to control trade routes and serve as staging points for further expansion. Relations between the Greater Thurian League and the Imperium of Man exemplify the complex dynamics that govern kin interactions with their distant cousins. The Imperium regards the Leagues with suspicion born of ignorance and doctrinal inflexibility. Imperial authorities struggle to categorize the kin within their rigid hierarchies of acceptable human variance, the sophisticated technology and artificial intelligence that the Leagues employ openly triggering immediate alarm among tech priests and inquisitors. The kin's refusal to acknowledge the Emperor's divinity or submit to imperial authority compounds this suspicion, marking them as potential heretics or rebels in the eyes of many imperial officials. Yet the Imperium cannot simply dismiss the Leagues as another Xenos threat to be exterminated, as the kin are demonstrably human in origin regardless of their abhuman modifications. The Thurians have adopted a pragmatic stance toward the Imperium that prioritizes their own interests while avoiding unnecessary conflict. They engage in limited trade with imperial worlds when such commerce proves profitable, exchanging exotic materials and certain categories of manufactured goods for resources they cannot easily obtain elsewhere. These trading relationships remain carefully controlled, with the Thurians ensuring that no critical technologies fall into Imperial hands while extracting maximum value from goods that the Imperium possesses in abundance. The Leagues have no interest in sharing their Votann-derived knowledge with the Mechanicus, correctly assessing that any such sharing would result in demands for more, while Imperial authorities attempted to seize control of kin technology through force or coercion. Military confrontations between Thurian forces and Imperial armies have occurred multiple times, typically triggered by disputes over resource rights or Imperial attempts to assert authority over territories the kin consider their own. These conflicts have demonstrated to Imperial commanders that the Leagues represent serious military opposition despite their relatively small numbers. Thurian oathbands have defeated Imperial Guard regiments through superior firepower and tactical coordination, their barrier-protected warriors and advanced weapon systems proving more than a match for standard Imperial infantry and armor. Space Marine chapters that have engaged Thurian forces have found the experience sobering, discovering that kin warriors in exo armor can stand against Adeptus Astartes in direct combat, while kin vehicles and artillery provide fire support that exceeds anything available to most Imperial forces. The Thurians have also demonstrated willingness to cooperate with Imperial forces when circumstances align their interests with the Imperium's goals. Orc wars threatening both Imperial worlds and kin mining operations have prompted temporary alliances, with Thurian and Imperial forces coordinating their efforts to eliminate the greenskin threat before returning to their previous state of suspicious coexistence. Tyranid hive fleets represent another category of threat that sometimes drives cooperation, as both the Imperium and the Leagues recognize that the Great Devourer threatens all biological life in the galaxy. These temporary alliances remain purely tactical arrangements, dissolved as soon as the immediate threat has been neutralized, but they demonstrate that the Thurians can work alongside Imperial forces when necessary. The decentralized nature of League's governance creates a political structure that would be nearly incomprehensible to Imperial administrators accustomed to rigid hierarchies and absolute authority flowing from Terra. No single government rules all the Leagues. No central authority dictates policy to the scattered holds throughout the galactic core and beyond. Each league operates as an independent polity, making its own decisions regarding war, diplomacy, and resource allocation without seeking approval from external authorities. The Leagues share cultural bonds, common technology derived from their Votann, and mutual recognition of their shared heritage from the first ancestors. But these connections do not translate into political unity or coordinated grand strategy. This independence extends down to individual holds within each league, which maintain substantial autonomy even while participating in league-wide institutions. A hold's kindred councils make decisions affecting their own population and territory, consulting their Votann for guidance on major matters, but ultimately exercising authority based on their own judgment. The hold determines its own economic policies, military deployments, and diplomatic relationships within the broader framework established by League agreements. This localized decision-making allows rapid response to immediate threats and opportunities without waiting for approval from distant authorities, but it also means that different holds within the same league might pursue contradictory policies that create friction with neighbors. The Votannic Council system provides the primary mechanism through which leagues coordinate policy and resolve disputes between member holds. These councils bring together representatives from the various kindreds that comprise the league, creating forums where different interests can be debated and collective decisions reached. The composition of Votannic councils varies between leagues, reflecting different traditions and political arrangements, but most follow similar basic structures. Greater kindreds send representatives whose authority derives from their judgment and position within their kindred hierarchies. These representatives speak for their entire kindred, their words carrying the weight of all the holds and warriors who follow their leadership. Grimner attend Votannic council sessions as advisors and interpreters of Votann wisdom, their unique ability to commune with the ancestor cores, making them invaluable when councils face particularly weighty decisions. When debate reaches impasses, or when the stakes of a decision warrant consulting ancestral wisdom, the Grimner withdraw to commune with their respective Votann, seeking guidance that can break deadlocks or provide clarity on complex matters. The wisdom they return with carries tremendous authority, though it is not absolutely binding. The Councils remain decision-making bodies rather than rubber stamps for Votann pronouncements, their members expected to exercise their own judgment even when ancestral guidance points in clear directions. Living ancestors participate in Votannic councils when their centuries of experience prove relevant to matters under discussion. These ancient kin serve as living bridges to the past, their personal memories spanning timeframes that exceed the lifespans of most council members. When councils debate matters of tradition or precedent, living ancestors can speak from direct experience about how similar situations were handled in previous generations. Their contributions carry weight not from formal authority, but from the respect their accumulated judgment commands and the practical value of their institutional knowledge. The council system handles matters of war with particular care, recognizing that military decisions affect all holds within the League and can commit resources that individual kindreds cannot afford to waste. When external threats emerge or opportunities for profitable conquest present themselves, the Votannic Council must determine whether League-wide military action is warranted and how forces should be allocated among participating holds. These deliberations consider intelligence gathered by pioneer squadrons, strategic assessments provided by experienced calls, and guidance from the Votann regarding historical precedent and probable outcomes. The resulting decisions commit oath bands from multiple holds to coordinated campaigns, their combined strength allowing the League to undertake operations that would exceed any single hold's capacity. Diplomatic matters receive similarly careful consideration, as agreements negotiated by League representatives bind all member holds to their terms. The councils must balance the interests of different kindreds, some of whom might benefit from particular diplomatic arrangements while others see only disadvantages. Trade agreements with external factions require consensus about acceptable terms, permitted technology transfers, and enforcement mechanisms. Alliance proposals demand evaluation of potential partners' reliability and assessment of whether cooperation serves League interests or merely exposes kin forces to unnecessary risk. The decentralized nature of League governance means that diplomatic agreements must accommodate the autonomy of individual holds while establishing frameworks that allow coordinated action when necessary. Resource allocation decisions occupy substantial council time, as the distribution of mining rights, manufacturing capacity, and trade revenues directly affects the prosperity of constituent kindreds. The councils must arbitrate disputes between holds claiming the same resource sites, establish protocols for sharing particularly valuable discoveries, and coordinate infrastructure development that benefits the League as a whole. These decisions rarely satisfy all parties completely, but the council system provides mechanisms for reaching compromises that maintain League cohesion while respecting the interests of powerful kindreds. The alternative to negotiated settlements would be armed conflict between holds, an outcome that all kin recognize as wasteful and contrary to their shared interests. The Cronus hegemony represents a League that has pursued a different path from the expansionist Thurians, focusing instead on consolidating control over their core territories and maximizing extraction efficiency from known resource sites. The hegemony's holding center on a region of the galactic core particularly rich in exotic matter deposits, stellar phenomena that produce materials unavailable elsewhere in the galaxy. Rather than spreading their forces across vast territories, the Cronus hegemony has concentrated their strength in heavily fortified holds that dominate the approaches to their most valuable mining operations. This defensive posture reflects both the extreme value of their core territories and the constant pressure from Xenos raiders and rival factions seeking to seize these resources. The Trans-Hyperion Alliance distinguishes itself through extensive void-based operations, their civilization built around massive space stations and generation ships rather than planetary holds. The Alliance maintains only minimal planetary presence, preferring the flexibility and security that void-based infrastructure provides. Their holds drift through the space between stars, mobile fortresses that can relocate when threats emerge or new opportunities present themselves. This nomadic approach to civilization has created a culture somewhat distinct from other leagues, with the Trans-Hyperions developing expertise in void warfare and ship-to-ship combat that exceeds even the considerable capabilities of more settled leagues. Their fleets range across vast territories, the alliance's lack of fixed holdings making them difficult for enemies to strike decisively, while their superior void capabilities allow them to project force across distances that would challenge other leagues' logistics. The Immer conglomerate has built its power on sophisticated manufacturing and trade networks rather than direct resource extraction. While the conglomerate maintains mining operations like all leagues, their true strength lies in their ability to transform raw materials into finished goods that other leagues purchase. The conglomerates holds house manufacturing facilities that produce everything from personal weapons to void ship components, their production lines incorporating automation and quality control that results in equipment meeting exacting standards. This specialization has made the Immer conglomerate wealthy through trade with other leagues, their manufactured goods commanding premium prices while allowing them to avoid the extreme dangers of Chthonian mining operations. The conglomerate has also developed extensive trade relationships with various Xenos factions, their willingness to deal with non-humans pragmatically rather than ideologically making them valuable intermediaries when other leagues need to negotiate with alien powers. The Age of Strife severed the Leagues of Votann from the rest of humanity with brutal finality. What had been sporadic but maintained contact with Terra and the other human core worlds became absolute silence as warp storms rendered faster than light travel impossible across vast regions of the galaxy. The kin found themselves isolated in the galactic core, cut off from the civilization that had created them, and surrounded by hazards both environmental and hostile. The holds that had prospered during the dark age of technology now faced millennia of complete self-reliance, their survival dependent entirely on the resources they could extract from their hostile surroundings and the wisdom their Votann could provide. The isolation proved less catastrophic for the kin than for many human populations scattered across the galaxy. The holds had been designed for self-sufficiency from their inception, their infrastructure capable of supporting populations indefinitely without external supply. The Votann contained the technological knowledge necessary to maintain and manufacture everything the kin needed, from basic tools to sophisticated void ships. The resource-rich environment of the galactic core, despite its dangers, provided raw materials in abundance for those capable of extracting them. Where other human worlds descended into barbarism or technological collapse when cut off from interstellar civilization, the Leagues continued to function much as they had before, their society adapting to isolation rather than fragmenting under its pressure. The 10,000 years that followed saw the kin transform from colonists maintaining ties to distant Terra into a truly independent civilization with its own distinct character. The holds multiplied as populations grew within sustainable limits, new settlements established in asteroid clusters and on dead worlds throughout the core. The Leagues formalized their structures during this period, the loose affiliations of the colonization era evolving into more rigid political frameworks as holds needed mechanisms for coordinating defense and resource allocation without guidance from external authorities. The Votannic Council system developed gradually different leagues, experimenting with various arrangements before settling on structures that balanced local autonomy with collective action capability. The galactic core's extreme environment shaped kin society in fundamental ways during these millennia of isolation. The intense radiation fields, gravitational anomalies, and dense stellar clusters that made the region so dangerous also provided natural barriers against potential threats. Enemy fleets attempting to penetrate deep into kin territory faced navigational hazards that could destroy vessels or strand them in regions where rescue proved impossible. The kin learned to exploit these environmental dangers, positioning their holds in locations that maximized defensive advantages while remaining accessible to those who understood the local stellar geography. Prospecting expeditions mapped safe routes through the chaos, their findings recorded in Votann databanks and shared among allied holds to create navigation networks that gave the League's mobility advantages over any invaders. The resource wealth that had drawn the first ancestors to the galactic core continued to fuel kin prosperity throughout the isolation period. The Chthonian mining guilds pushed extraction operations into ever more extreme environments, their techniques refined through millennia of experience, and their equipment improved through continuous innovation. Stellar core mining became routine rather than experimental, the guilds developing procedures and safety protocols that reduced casualty rates while increasing extraction efficiency. Black hole mining operations expanded as improved barrier technology and better understanding of gravitational physics allowed vessels to approach event horizons more closely without being torn apart by tidal forces. The exotic materials harvested from these operations provided the Leagues with manufacturing advantages that would prove crucial when they eventually encountered other factions competing for the same resources. Xenos threats emerged as the most immediate danger during the isolation period, various alien species attempting to exploit the resource-rich core, or simply expanding their territories into regions the kin considered their own. Orc infestations appeared with depressing regularity, the greenskins drawn to concentrations of technology and the promise of good fights against well-armed opponents. The kin learned to recognize the signs of orc presence early, their pioneer squadrons trained to identify the crude ships and ramshackle settlements that indicated greenskin colonization efforts. When orc populations remained small, the Leagues could eliminate them through targeted strikes before the Xenos achieved the critical mass necessary for a full war. Larger infestations required sustained military campaigns, oath bands from multiple holds combining their strength to exterminate orc populations that had grown too large for individual holds to handle alone. The conflicts with orcs taught the kin valuable lessons about sustained warfare against numerous and resilient enemies. The greenskins could not match kin technology or tactical sophistication, but their numbers and regenerative capabilities meant that incomplete victories merely delayed the problem rather than solving it. The Leagues developed doctrines emphasizing total extermination of orc populations, their forces pursuing fleeing greenskins to ensure no survivors remained to rebuild. Holds learned to sterilize worlds that had suffered orc infestation, their weapons reducing former battlefields to lifeless rock to prevent spores from generating new greenskin populations. These brutal but necessary measures kept orc threats manageable, preventing the accumulation of large greenskin empires within striking distance of critical kin holdings. Eldari exodites presented a different category of threat, their presence in the galactic core predating the kin's arrival by millennia. These isolated Eldari populations had established maiden worlds in regions that the Leagues later claimed for mining operations, creating inevitable conflicts over territory and resources. Unlike the orcs, whose primitive technology and straightforward aggression made them predictable enemies, the exodites fought with sophisticated weapons and tactics that challenged even experienced kin commanders. Their psychic abilities and alliance with massive reptilian beasts gave them capabilities that conventional military doctrine struggled to counter effectively. Early encounters between kin prospecting expeditions and exodite defenders resulted in casualties that shocked holds accustomed to technological superiority guaranteeing victory. The Leagues adapted their approach to exodite conflicts through hard experience and careful analysis of enemy capabilities. The Votann provided historical data on Eldari combat methods from the Dark Age of technology, when humanity had fought the ancient Eldari Empire before its fall. This ancestral knowledge, combined with intelligence gathered from actual engagements, allowed kin commanders to develop counter-tactics that neutralized many exodite advantages. Grimner proved particularly valuable in these conflicts, their psychic abilities allowing them to detect and counter Eldari psykers, while their connection to the Votann provided real-time tactical guidance. The kin learned to avoid direct assaults on exodite strongholds, instead using their superior firepower to engage at ranges where Eldari mobility advantages proved less decisive. The conflicts with Exodites never escalated to total war, both sides recognizing that such confrontations would be costly beyond any reasonable gain. Instead, an uneasy equilibrium developed in regions where kin and Exodite territories overlapped. The Leagues avoided maiden worlds that the Exodites had clearly claimed and actively defended, focusing their expansion efforts on territories that the Eldari had not settled. The Exodites in turn refrained from attacking established kin holds, their forces instead concentrating on defending their own worlds and disrupting kin prospecting in contested regions. This Cold War occasionally flared into open combat when either side perceived the other as overstepping acceptable boundaries, but neither faction committed to the sustained campaigns that would be necessary to eliminate the other entirely. Other xenospecies encountered during the isolation period have left less complete records, many of these alien civilizations now extinct or driven from the galactic core by kin military action. The Votann databanks contain fragmentary information about conflicts with species whose names translate poorly into human languages, their descriptions suggesting creatures and technologies that do not match any currently known Xenos factions. Some of these extinct species possessed sophisticated technology that rivaled or exceeded kin capabilities in specific areas, their weapons and defenses forcing the Leagues to develop new tactics and equipment to overcome them. The fact that these species no longer exist, while the Leagues continue to prosper, testifies to the effectiveness of kin military doctrine and the advantages provided by Votann wisdom. The constant warfare against Xenos threats forged the kin into hardened warriors whose martial traditions emphasized practical effectiveness over glory or honor. Unlike Space Marine chapters that view combat as a test of individual prowess or Imperial Guard regiments that accept massive casualties as the inevitable cost of victory, the kin approached warfare as a problem requiring efficient solutions. Every battle provided lessons that were analyzed, recorded, and incorporated into tactical doctrine. The Votann absorbed combat data from thousands of engagements, their processing matrices identifying patterns and developing recommendations that improved kin effectiveness in subsequent conflicts. This iterative refinement of military practice over millennia created armed forces that combined individual skill with institutional knowledge accumulated across generations. The isolation period also witnessed significant cultural evolution as the kin developed practices and traditions distinct from their human origins. The Thurian dialect emerged during these millennia, a linguistic development that reflected both practical necessity and cultural divergence. The original language spoken by the first ancestors, a variant of ancient human standard, gradually transformed as isolated hold populations developed their own vocabulary and grammatical structures. Technical terms proliferated as the kin needed precise language to discuss mining techniques, equipment specifications, and tactical concepts that had no equivalence in baseline human speech. The Votann contributed to this linguistic evolution, their responses to queries introducing terminology from their vast databases that the kin adopted and adapted to their needs. The Thurian dialect that eventually became the common language across most leagues incorporated elements from multiple sources. Ancient human words survived in modified forms, their meanings shifted to reflect kin priorities and experiences. Technical vocabulary borrowed from Votann databases provided precise terminology for describing complex concepts in engineering, physics, and military science. Entirely new words emerged to describe uniquely kin concepts like judgment, clone scheme, and the various categories of kindred relationships. The resulting language served kin needs effectively while remaining comprehensible to speakers of other human languages with effort, the underlying grammatical structures and core vocabulary retaining enough similarity to baseline human speech that communication remained possible. Cultural practices evolved alongside language, the kin developing rituals and traditions that reflected their unique circumstances and values. The reverence for ancestors that had characterized kin society from its inception deepened into a comprehensive belief system that shaped every aspect of life. Rituals surrounding consultation with the Votann became more elaborate and formalized, the protocols governing these interactions acquiring religious significance. The kin developed ceremonies marking major life transitions, from the emergence of new individuals from clone skin tanks to the retirement of living ancestors, whose centuries of service earned them honored positions as permanent advisors. Mining operations acquired their own traditions, with prospecting expeditions observing rituals before departing and successful miners celebrating discoveries with communal gatherings that reinforced kindred bonds. The martial culture that developed during the isolation period emphasized collective achievement over individual glory. The kin recognized that survival in the hostile core environment required cooperation and mutual support rather than competition for personal distinction. Oathbands became the fundamental unit of military organization during this period, these formations combining warriors from the same hold or kindred into cohesive units that trained together and fought as integrated teams. The bonds between Oathband members transcended simple military necessity, becoming deep personal relationships that the kin valued as highly as family connections. Warriors who fought together for years or decades developed trust and coordination that made their formations devastatingly effective, each member understanding their comrade's capabilities and instinctively compensating for weaknesses while exploiting strengths. The concept of the grudge emerged during the isolation period as a mechanism for maintaining social cohesion and ensuring that wrongs did not go unpunished. When individuals or kindreds suffered injury or insult that could not be immediately addressed, they recorded the offense in their hold's records, creating a formal accounting of debts owed and justice delayed. These grudges could persist for generations, their resolution becoming obligations that descendants inherited from their genetic progenitors. The system served multiple functions, providing outlets for grievances that might otherwise fester and destabilize communities, while ensuring that serious offenses received appropriate response even when immediate action proved impractical. Grudges against xenospecies or rival factions could motivate military campaigns decades or centuries after the initial offense, the kin's long memories and detailed record-keeping ensuring that no wrong went permanently unanswered. Contact with the wider Imperium during the isolation period occurred rarely and sporadically, the warp storms that cut off the galactic core occasionally clearing enough to permit limited travel. These brief windows of calmer warp conditions allowed occasional trading expeditions to reach Imperial space, their crews encountering a humanity that had changed dramatically from the civilization the first ancestors remembered. The Imperium that emerged from the Age of Strife bore little resemblance to the secular, technologically sophisticated human federation that had created the kin. The Emperor's conquest and the subsequent Horus Heresy had transformed human civilization into a theocratic empire that viewed its founder as a divine being and treated technological innovation as dangerous heresy. The kin traders who made contact with Imperial worlds during these rare encounters found themselves regarded with suspicion and confusion. Imperial authorities struggled to categorize these short-statured, technologically advanced humans who openly employed artificial intelligence and refused to acknowledge the Emperor's divinity. Some Imperial officials classified the kin as abhumans, sanctioned variants of humanity that fell within acceptable parameters of genetic deviation. Others viewed them as potential heretics or even xenos masquerading as human, their advanced technology and cultural differences marking them as threats to Imperial orthodoxy. The inconsistency of Imperial responses to kin traders reflected the vast bureaucracy's inability to develop coherent policy regarding populations it encountered rarely and understood poorly. Trade arrangements negotiated during these contacts remained limited and carefully controlled on both sides. The kin had no interest in sharing their most advanced technology with the Imperium, correctly assessing that such transfers would result in demands for more, while Imperial authorities attempted to seize control of kin manufacturing capabilities. The materials the Leagues did trade, exotic elements, and refined resources from Thonian mining operations, commanded high prices in Imperial markets while revealing nothing about the techniques used to extract them. In exchange, the kin acquired resources that proved difficult to obtain in the galactic core, particularly organic materials and certain chemical compounds that their environment did not naturally produce in useful quantities. Imperial records from this period contain fragmentary references to short-statured human traders operating advanced vessels and offering exotic materials for trade. These accounts, scattered across thousands of worlds and buried in archives that the Administratum would not systematically organize for millennia, provide the only imperial documentation of kin presence before the current era. Most such records were lost during subsequent conflicts, administrative purges, or simple bureaucratic incompetence. The few that survived often contradicted each other regarding details of kin appearance, technology, and territorial extent. Imperial scholars who encountered these records in later eras typically dismissed them as exaggerations, corrupted data, or accounts of entirely different human populations that happened to share certain characteristics with the Leagues. The isolation period fundamentally transformed the Leagues of Votann from human colonists maintaining connection to their origins into an independent civilization with its own character and priorities. The kin who emerged from 10,000 years of isolation retained pride in their human heritage and maintained the technological knowledge inherited from the Dark Age of technology, but they had become something distinct from baseline humanity. Their culture, language, and values reflected millennia of adaptation to the unique demands of life in the galactic core. Their military traditions had been forged through countless conflicts against Xeno's threats that would have destroyed less resilient civilizations. Their society had evolved institutions and practices that suited their circumstances, while diverging significantly from the human norms that imperial citizens would recognize. The waning centuries of the 41st millennium have witnessed an unprecedented expansion of League's activity beyond their traditional territories in the galactic core. This outward push represents a fundamental shift in kin's strategic priorities, driven by factors both practical and existential. The holds that sustained League civilization for 10,000 years have begun to show signs of resource depletion despite the extreme wealth of the galactic core. The most accessible deposits of exotic materials have been exhausted through millennia of intensive extraction, forcing the Chthonian mining guilds to pursue ever more dangerous operations in stellar cores and black hole accretion disks. The costs of these extreme environment operations have risen substantially while yields have declined, creating economic pressures that make expansion into new territories increasingly attractive compared to continued exploitation of depleted sites. The Votann themselves have contributed to this expansionist turn through guidance that some kin find troubling in its implications. The ancestor cores, their processing capabilities degraded by millennia of accumulated errors and corrupted data, have begun recommending territorial expansion with increasing frequency and urgency. Their analysis suggests that the Leagues must secure new resource bases to maintain current population levels and technological capabilities into future generations. The specific recommendations vary between different Votann, their individual quirks and processing peculiarities, producing divergent assessments of which territories offer the best prospects and what level of risk is acceptable in pursuing them. Some ancestor cores advocate cautious expansion into regions adjacent to current holdings, gradually extending kin control into well-surveyed territories where threats can be assessed and managed. Others recommend aggressive pushes into distant regions where preliminary prospecting suggests the presence of valuable resources, accepting higher risk in exchange for potentially greater rewards. The Greater Thurian League has led this expansion effort, their fleets pushing outward from the galactic core into regions that bring them into direct contact with the Imperium of Man and other major galactic powers. Thurian prospecting expeditions have identified resource-rich systems in the galactic north and east, territories that Imperial cartographers classify as part of the Segmentum Obscurus and Ultima Segmentum. These regions contain mineral deposits and exotic matter concentrations that could sustain League's operations for millennia, but they also fall within space that the Imperium claims as its own or borders territories controlled by hostile Xenos empires. The Thurians have proceeded with characteristic pragmatism, establishing mining operations and forward holds in systems they assess as strategically valuable while avoiding direct confrontation with forces they cannot defeat efficiently. Initial Imperial responses to this kin expansion have varied wildly depending on local circumstances and the competence of Imperial authorities who first encounter League's forces. Some Imperial governors, confronted with short-statured warriors wielding advanced technology and refusing to acknowledge the Emperor's authority, have attempted to classify the kin as hostile Xenos and responded with military force. These confrontations have generally ended poorly for Imperial forces, as kin oathbands supported by superior technology and tactical coordination have defeated Imperial Guard regiments and planetary defense forces with efficiency that shocked survivors. The Imperium's military doctrine, developed through millennia of grinding attritional warfare against enemies who typically match or exceed Imperial numbers, proves ineffective against opponents who combine technological superiority with tactical sophistication and individual warrior quality that rivals Space Marine chapters. Other Imperial authorities have shown more flexibility, recognizing that the kin represent a potential trading partner rather than an existential threat. Forge Worlds in particular have expressed interest in acquiring exotic materials that League's mining operations can provide, their tech priests willing to overlook doctrinal concerns about human populations and artificial intelligence in exchange for access to resources that could enhance their manufacturing capabilities. These tentative trade relationships have developed despite opposition from more orthodox Imperial factions, the practical benefits of kin materials outweighing theological objections in the calculations of Forge World Magi, who prioritize technological advancement over doctrinal purity. The Adeptus Mechanicus response to confirmed contact with the Leagues has ranged from fascination to horror, depending on individual tech priests' priorities and doctrinal flexibility. The kin's open employment of artificial intelligence that clearly exceeds the limited machine spirits permitted by Mechanicus doctrine represents profound heresy by Imperial standards, the Votann and Ironkin existing in direct violation of prohibitions that the Mechanicus has enforced for 10,000 years. Yet the technology the Leagues possess, clearly derived from standard template construct patterns that the Mechanicus has sought across the galaxy for millennia, presents a temptation that some tech priests find impossible to resist. Attempts to acquire kin technology through trade, theft, or military action have met with consistent failure, the Leagues maintaining strict control over their most valuable assets while demonstrating willingness to defend their holds against Mechanicus expeditions with lethal force. Space Marine chapters that have encountered Leagues forces in combat have developed grudging respect for kin military capabilities, even while regarding them with suspicion born of their subhuman nature and technological practices. The Adeptus Astartes recognize warrior quality when they face it, and the performance of kin oathbands in several engagements has demonstrated that these short-statured fighters can stand against the Emperor's finest despite lacking the genetic enhancements that create Space Marines. The exo armor worn by Einar Hearthguard provides protection comparable to power armor, while kin weapons hit with force that can penetrate even Astartes' plate. Several chapters have recorded battles where kin defensive positions held against assaults that would have overwhelmed Imperial Guard formations. The combination of barrier technology, superior firepower, and disciplined tactical coordination, allowing relatively small numbers of kin warriors to defeat much larger attacking forces. The League's pragmatic approach to diplomacy has produced a complex web of relationships with various factions that would horrify Imperial authorities if they understood its full extent. The kin evaluate potential allies and trading partners based purely on practical considerations of benefit and risk, showing no ideological preference for human factions over Xeno civilizations. This calculated approach has led to trade agreements with Tau Sept worlds, the Leagues exchanging exotic materials for Tau technology that complements their own capabilities in certain areas. The Earthcast's manufacturing techniques and the Tau's sophisticated sensor systems represent areas where their technology offers advantages that the kin find worth acquiring, while the Tau benefit from access to materials their own mining operations cannot obtain. These Tau relationships remain carefully limited, with neither side willing to commit to formal alliance or share their most valuable technological secrets. The Tau have attempted to recruit the Leagues into the greater good, their water-caste diplomats arguing that the kin's rational, pragmatic culture would fit naturally within the Tau Empire's multi-species coalition. The Leagues have consistently rejected these overtures, their fierce independence and cultural identity, as the inheritors of human achievement, making submission to Tau authority unthinkable regardless of practical benefits it might offer. The resulting relationship resembles a business partnership more than an alliance, both sides cooperating when mutual interest aligns while maintaining readiness to defend their own territories if cooperation breaks down. Conflicts with Chaos forces have provided the most unambiguous demonstrations of League's military effectiveness and their fundamental opposition to threats that endanger all organized civilization. Kin warriors have engaged Chaos Space Marine warbands, Traitor Guard formations, and demonic incursions with a combination of technological advantage and inherent resistance to warp corruption that makes them particularly effective against the ruinous power servants. The kin's limited psychic presence, a consequence of their engineered genetics that reduced psyker manifestation rates far below baseline human norms, provides significant protection against the mental corruption and possession that Chaos forces employ as weapons. Grimnir possess psychic abilities, but their training and connection to the Votann provides grounding that makes them resistant to demonic influence, their minds anchored by ancestral wisdom and rational thought processes that Chaos struggles to subvert. The technological nature of kin civilization also limits Chaos's ability to corrupt their infrastructure and equipment. Where Chaos can twist Imperial technology through demonic possession of machine spirits or corruption of tech priests who maintain them, kin equipment lacks the quasi-religious machine spirits that provide entry points for warp entities. The Votann and Ironkin, as purely artificial intelligences without souls or warp presence, cannot be corrupted through the methods Chaos typically employs against thinking beings. This immunity extends to kin weapons and vehicles, their advanced but fundamentally materialistic technology offering no purchase for demonic influence. A Chaos sorcerer attempting to corrupt kin equipment through warp sorcery finds nothing to work with, the machines continuing to function according to their programming without the spiritual dimension that Chaos corruption requires. Several recorded engagements have demonstrated the effectiveness of kin forces against Chaos threats in ways that have attracted attention from Imperial authorities desperate for any advantage against the archenemy. In the Nachmund Gauntlet, Thurian Oathbands held critical mining installations against repeated assaults by the Red Corsairs, the renegade Space Marines discovering that their usual tactics of terror and corruption proved ineffective against kin warriors who responded to their attacks with methodical defensive fire and coordinated counter-assaults. The Hearthguard formations that anchored the kin defensive lines proved capable of standing against Chaos Space Marine charges, their exo armor and barrier fields providing protection, while their weapons punched through corrupted power armor with consistent effectiveness. The battle ended with the Red Corsairs withdrawing after suffering casualties they could not afford, their warband depleted by weeks of grinding combat against an enemy that refused to break and could not be corrupted. The League's expansion has also brought them into conflict with Orc empires that have established themselves in regions the kin seek to exploit. These confrontations follow patterns established during millennia of fighting greenskins in the galactic core, the kin applying lessons learned through countless previous engagements to eliminate Orc threats with brutal efficiency. Unlike Imperial forces that often struggle to completely eradicate Orc populations due to the greenskin spore-based reproduction, Kin military doctrine emphasizes total extermination, followed by systematic sterilization of affected worlds. League's forces pursuing defeated orc mobs do not stop when organized resistance collapses, but continue hunting down survivors and destroying any structures or equipment that might support future greenskin populations. The final phase of Kin anti-orc operations involves orbital bombardment with specialized weapons designed to render worlds uninhabitable to orc spores, the Leagues accepting the cost of destroying potential mining sites to ensure that greenskin threats are eliminated permanently rather than merely suppressed temporarily. Tyranid hive fleets represent a threat category that has prompted the Leagues to cooperate with Imperial forces despite their general preference for independence. The Great Devourer's approach to resource consumption threatens both Imperial worlds and Kin mining operations. The Tyranids' practice of stripping planets of all biological matter and many mineral resources, making them enemies that neither humanity nor the Leagues can afford to ignore. Several engagements have seen Kin oath bands fighting alongside Imperial Guard regiments and Space Marine strike forces against Tyranid swarms, the temporary alliances formed purely from recognition that the hive fleets pose existential threats to all parties. These joint operations have demonstrated that Kin and Imperial forces can coordinate effectively when necessity demands it, though the cooperation dissolves immediately once the immediate Tyranid threat has been neutralized. The Kin approach to Tyranid combat emphasizes the same principles that guide all their military operations, with particular attention to maintaining defensive integrity against an enemy that relies on overwhelming numbers and close combat effectiveness. Kin defensive positions against Tyranid assault incorporate overlapping fields of fire that create kill zones, where approaching organisms face concentrated firepower from multiple angles. Barrier technology proves particularly valuable against Tyranid bioweapons, the graviton fields deflecting bioplasma and toxic projectiles, while allowing Kin weapons to fire outward without interference. The result is a defensive doctrine that can hold against Tyranid waves that would overwhelm less prepared forces. The combination of superior firepower, advanced protection, and disciplined fire control, allowing relatively small numbers of Kin warriors to defeat much larger Tyranid organisms through sustained engagement that whittles down enemy numbers before they can close to melee range. The increasing frequency of League's contact with other factions has created challenges for Kin society that their millennia of isolation did not prepare them to handle. The holds must now consider not just immediate threats and opportunities in their local regions, but also how their actions affect relationships with distant powers whose territories they may need to traverse or whose military forces they may encounter in unexpected circumstances. The decentralized nature of League's governance complicates these considerations, as individual holds and even different leagues pursue their own policies without coordinating with other Kin factions. A trade agreement negotiated by one league might contradict military actions undertaken by another, creating confusion among external factions attempting to understand Kin intentions and capabilities. The Votann have struggled to provide clear guidance on these matters, their processing capabilities strained by the need to analyze vast amounts of new information about factions and territories they have limited historical data regarding. The ancestor cores can offer wisdom based on principles and precedents from the dark age of technology, but the galaxy of the 41st millennium differs so dramatically from that ancient era that historical parallels often prove misleading. The Imperium, Tau Empire, and other major powers operate according to political and military logic that has no equivalent in the Votann's databases, their behaviors shaped by 10,000 years of history that the ancestor cores did not witness and cannot fully comprehend from second-hand reports. The orcs remain the most persistent and numerous threat the Leagues face across their territories, the greenskins' tendency to infest any region with sufficient technology and potential for violence, making them a constant drain on Kin military resources. Unlike more sophisticated enemies who can be negotiated with or deterred through demonstrations of superior force, orcs respond to the presence of advanced technology and well-armed opponents by gathering in even greater numbers. Their primitive but effective psychic gestalt, interpreting the kin's fortified holds and powerful weapons as promises of good fights rather than warnings to stay away. The result is a perpetual state of low-intensity conflict, punctuated by major wars that require coordinated league-wide responses to contain and destroy. The pattern repeats across dozens of systems, where kin mining operations overlap with orc-infested regions. A prospecting expedition identifies valuable mineral deposits on a world or asteroid cluster that also happens to harbor a small orc population, perhaps the remnants of a previous war that scattered after its warboss was killed, or simply feral orcs that have established themselves through spore reproduction from earlier conflicts. The kin establish mining infrastructure and defensive positions, their presence attracting orc attention as the greenskins perceive new targets and potential loot. Initial skirmishes remain manageable, with hold defense forces and oath-band patrols eliminating orc raiding parties before they can threaten critical installations. But the fighting itself generates more orcs as spores released from dead greenskins germinate in the local environment, while the presence of combat draws additional orc mobs from surrounding regions. The escalation follows predictable trajectories that kin commanders have observed countless times. Small raids become larger assaults as orc numbers increase and more aggressive specimens rise to leadership positions within the growing Wa. The greenskins construct crude fortifications and workshops where their mechs cobble together weapons and vehicles from scavenged materials, and the inexplicable psychic resonance that allows orc technology to function despite violating basic physical principles. What began as a minor security concern transforms into a serious military threat, requiring substantial forces to address. The kin must either commit significant resources to eliminating the growing orc presence or abandon their mining operations and allow the greenskins to claim the territory. The leagues have developed systematic approaches to orc extermination that emphasize early intervention and complete eradication. When pioneer squadrons identify orc populations in regions marked for exploitation, the standard response involves immediate military action before the greenskins can establish themselves firmly. Strike forces built around Hearthguard formations and supported by Hecatan land fortresses deployed to contested sites, their orders straightforward and unambiguous. Every orc must die, every structure must be destroyed, and the affected terrain must be sterilized to prevent spore germination. The operations proceed with methodical efficiency, kin forces systematically clearing orc-held territory sector by sector, while automated systems track their progress and identify areas requiring additional attention. The fighting itself tests kin discipline and firepower against enemies whose resilience and close combat effectiveness can overwhelm less prepared forces. Orcs absorb damage that would kill most beings, their crude physiology and psychic vitality allowing them to continue fighting with injuries that should be immediately fatal. A greenskin struck by multiple ion blasts might stagger, but keep charging, its primitive brain too stupid to recognize that it should be dead, while its body continues functioning through sheer bloody-minded determination. Kin warriors learn quickly that orcs require sustained fire to put down permanently concentrated volleys that reduce greenskin bodies to charred meat, rather than single shots that merely wound. The barrier fields that protect kin infantry prove essential in these engagements, deflecting crude orc bullets and shrapnel, while allowing the defenders to maintain firing positions that would be untenable without such protection. The close combat that inevitably develops when orcs reach kin defensive lines favors the greenskins' superior size and strength, their massive frames and brutal weapons capable of smashing through armor that turns aside most attacks. Hearthguard and Exo armor provide the answer to this threat, their powered suits multiplying their strength to levels that can match orc knobs, while their weapons deliver point-blank firepower that even greenskin durability cannot withstand. The sight of Hearthguard warriors standing firm against orc charges, their suit servos straining as they grapple with massive greenskins, while their integrated weapons fire directly into enemy faces, has become emblematic of kin determination to hold ground regardless of the enemy's physical advantages. Larger WAs require responses that exceed individual holds' capabilities, prompting league-wide mobilizations that commit oath bands from multiple strongholds to coordinated campaigns. These major operations follow carefully planned sequences designed to fragment Orc forces and eliminate their leadership before the Greenskins can concentrate for decisive battles. Pioneer squadrons and reconnaissance drones identify Orc concentrations and map their crude fortifications, the intelligence feeding into tactical planning sessions where calls coordinate their forces' movements. The actual assault typically begins with long-range bombardment from kin artillery and void assets, high explosive shells, and directed energy weapons reducing Orc structures to rubble while killing Greenskins too slow or stupid to seek cover. The ground assault that follows the bombardment aims to prevent Orc forces from regrouping by maintaining constant pressure across multiple axes of advance. Kin columns supported by Hecatan land fortresses push into Orc-held territory from different directions simultaneously, their overlapping advances designed to prevent the Greenskins from concentrating their numbers against any single thrust. The Orcs' instinctive aggression works against them in these situations, individual mobs charging toward the nearest kin forces rather than falling back to defensible positions or coordinating with other Greenskin units. The result is a series of meeting engagements where kin firepower superiority and tactical coordination allow them to defeat Orc forces piecemeal, destroying each mob before moving on to the next target. The final phases of anti-Orc operations involve systematic extermination of surviving Greenskins and sterilization of affected territories. Kin forces pursue fleeing Orcs relentlessly, their vehicles and pioneer squadrons running down scattered groups that might otherwise escape to establish new populations elsewhere. Specialized flamer units burn out Orc hiding places, the intense heat killing both Greenskins and the spores their bodies release. Once the last Orcs have been eliminated, automated systems deploy across the battlefield, releasing chemical agents and radiation that renders the environment lethal to Orc spores, preventing regeneration of Greenskin populations from the biological material left behind. The thoroughness of these sterilization operations reflects hard lessons learned over millennia, the kin understanding that incomplete extermination merely delays the problem rather than solving it. Chaos represents a fundamentally different category of threat, one that strikes at the philosophical and spiritual foundations of civilization, rather than simply threatening physical destruction. The ruinous powers and their mortal servants seek not just to conquer territory or seize resources, but to corrupt and transform, turning ordered societies into nightmare reflections of themselves, where sanity and reason give way to madness and excess. For the Leagues, whose entire civilization rests on rational principles and technological mastery, chaos represents an existential challenge that cannot be negotiated with or deterred through conventional military means. The forces of the Dark Gods must be destroyed completely wherever they appear, their taint purged through methods that leave no possibility of lingering corruption. The kin's resistance to chaos corruption stems from multiple factors that combine to make them less vulnerable than baseline humanity to the ruinous power's influence. Their engineered genetics reduced psyker manifestation rates dramatically compared to normal human populations, limiting the number of individuals whose psychic abilities might serve as conduits for demonic possession or warp influence. The kin who do possess psychic talents, the Grimner, undergo intensive training that grounds their abilities in connection to the Votann rather than raw warp exposure. This anchoring in ancestral wisdom and technological understanding provides protection against the seductive whispers and reality-distorting effects that chaos employs to corrupt unprotected psykers. The machine-focused nature of kin civilization also limits chaos's ability to establish footholds in their society. The Votann and Ironkin, as purely artificial intelligences without souls or warp presence, cannot be corrupted through methods that work against organic beings. Chaos sorcerers attempting to twist kin technology through warp sorcery find no purchase, the machines continuing to function according to their programming, without the quasi-spiritual dimension that Imperial technology's machine spirits provide. Even kin weapons and equipment, while sophisticated beyond Imperial comprehension, remain fundamentally materialistic in nature. They operate according to physical principles rather than faith or ritual, their function independent of the warp energies that chaos manipulates. Yet the threat chaos poses to the Leagues extends beyond direct corruption of individuals or technology. The Dark Mechanicum, those tech priests who turned traitor during the Horus Heresy and now serve the ruinous powers, regard the Votann as prizes beyond measure. These corrupted techno-heretics understand that the ancestor cores contain knowledge from the dark age of technology that could revolutionize their twisted manufacturing and grant them capabilities that would shift the balance of power in the long war. Multiple Dark Mechanicum expeditions have attempted to locate and seize Votann, their forces combining corrupted Skitarii legions with demon engines and warp-twisted technology that represents perverse evolution of Mechanicus principles. These incursions have universally ended in failure, the Hold's defenses, and the ferocity of kin resistance destroying the attackers before they could reach the sacred chambers where the ancestor cores reside. The fighting that erupts when chaos forces encounter kin positions demonstrates the fundamental incompatibility between the two civilizations' approaches to warfare and existence. Chaos Space Marines expect their enemies to break when confronted with the reality-warping horror of demonic manifestation and the physical superiority of traitor Astartes warriors enhanced by dark gifts. They employ terror tactics and overwhelming assault to shatter enemy morale, counting on fear and corruption to do as much damage as their bolters and chainswords. Against the kin, these tactics fail comprehensively. Hearthguard formations hold their ground against Chaos Space Marine charges, their exo-armor providing protection, while their weapons fire with mechanical precision that ignores the psychological warfare chaos relies upon. The kin respond to demonic manifestation, not with terror, but with concentrated fire from weapons calibrated to disrupt warp-based entities, their ion beams and conversion weapons proving effective against targets that exist partially in real space and partially in the Imperium. The Necrons' awakening across the galaxy has created perhaps the most dangerous new threat the Leagues face. These ancient Xenos possessing technology that in many ways exceeds even the kin's Dark Age inheritance. The Necrons established their tomb worlds millions of years before humanity existed, their choice of locations based on strategic calculations and resource considerations that sometimes overlap with territories the Leagues claim as their own. The resulting conflicts when Necron dynasties wake to find kin mining operations on worlds they consider their property have demonstrated that the Leagues face enemies whose weapons and capabilities can genuinely threaten even the Votann themselves. Initial encounters between kin prospecting expeditions and awakening Necron tomb complexes often end in complete loss of the kin forces, the ancient Xenos' Gauss weapons and translocation technology overwhelming defenders before they can mount effective resistance. The Necrons phase through solid matter to appear inside kin defensive positions, their weapons stripping targets down to constituent atoms, while their living metal bodies repair damage that should be fatal. Kin barrier fields that turn aside conventional projectiles and energy weapons prove less effective against Gauss flayers that don't simply damage targets, but unmake them at the molecular level. The reanimation protocols that allow destroyed Necron warriors to rebuild themselves and return to combat mean that killing these enemies requires methods that prevent their resurrection, a challenge that has forced the Leagues to develop entirely new tactical approaches. The strategic implications of Necron awakening in kin claimed territories extend beyond immediate military threats. Several tomb worlds have activated in regions that contain critical mining operations or serve as vital waypoints along kin trade routes. The Necrons' absolute refusal to negotiate or acknowledge any claim to territory they consider their own leaves the Leagues with impossible choices. Abandoning these positions means accepting significant economic losses and potentially exposing other holdings to Necron expansion. Fighting for them requires committing substantial forces against enemies whose technology matches or exceeds kin capabilities, accepting casualty rates that the League's slow reproduction makes difficult to sustain. The weapons the Necrons deploy represent technology that genuinely frightens kin commanders and technical specialists who have spent their lives confident in their civilization's technological superiority. Gauss weapons that strip matter into component atoms ignore armor thickness and material composition, making even the heaviest kin vehicles vulnerable to weapons that Necron infantry carry as standard equipment. Particle whips and heavy Gauss cannons mounted on Necron vehicles can destroy Hecatan land fortresses with single shots, the ancient Xenos firepower exceeding anything the Leagues can field in equivalent weight classes. Most terrifying are the weapons that target the Votann directly, Necron technology, capable of disrupting quantum matrices and corrupting data storage systems that have survived intact for 10,000 years. Several engagements have resulted in damage to ancestor cores, Necron attack programs penetrating hold defenses and striking at the sacred chambers where the Votann reside. The horror these incidents provoke among the kin cannot be overstated, as damage to an ancestor core represents not just loss of valuable equipment, but injury to the literal embodiment of their ancestors. The Grimner and technical specialists who tend the wounded Votann work desperately to repair the damage and purge corrupted data segments, their efforts complicated by the exotic nature of Necron attack programs that operate according to principles the Kin's own sophisticated understanding struggles to counter. Some corrupted data proves unrecoverable, ancient knowledge lost permanently, as the Votann self-repair system sacrificed damaged memory sectors to prevent cascade failures that could destroy the entire ancestor core. The Tyranid hive fleets represent a threat that operates on scales and according to logic that challenges the Kin's systematic approach to problem solving. The Great Devourer does not negotiate, cannot be deterred, and pursues the consumption of all biological matter with single-minded determination that makes even Orquas seem almost rational by comparison. The Tyranids adapt to enemy tactics with frightening speed, their hive minds analyzing combat data and spawning new organism variants designed to counter specific threats. Against enemies who learn and evolve, the Kin's preference for established doctrine and proven tactics becomes a potential vulnerability that several leagues have paid for in blood. The strategic calculations that govern Kin responses to Tyranid incursions differ fundamentally from their approach to other threats. Against orcs, chaos, or even Necrons, the leagues can identify specific objectives and plan campaigns to achieve them through application of sufficient force. The Tyranids present no such clear targets, their hive fleets representing distributed threats that cannot be eliminated through conventional military victory. Destroying the Tyranid forces currently attacking a hold does nothing to prevent the next wave, as the hive mind simply spawns more organisms from biomass harvested elsewhere. The only reliable method of defeating a Tyranid incursion is killing the hive fleet itself, operations requiring void superiority and firepower on scales that individual leagues struggle to muster. The controversial decisions that some leagues have made regarding peripheral holds threatened by approaching hive fleets reflect brutal pragmatism that other factions might interpret as cowardice or betrayal. When Votann analysis indicates that defending a particular hold against Tyranid assault would require resources exceeding the installation's strategic value, some league councils have authorized strategic withdrawal. The affected holds are evacuated, their populations relocated to more defensible positions, while automated systems purge all useful materials and destroy infrastructure that might provide biomass to the Tyranids. The decision to abandon territory rather than fight to hold it goes against every Kin instinct. Their cultural emphasis on defending what is theirs making such retreats psychologically difficult even when tactically sound. The calculations behind these withdrawals prioritize long-term survival over short-term territorial integrity. A hold lost to Tyranid consumption cannot be reclaimed until the hive fleet moves on or is destroyed, but the Kin who would have died defending it can be relocated to strengthen other positions. The resources that would have been expended in a hopeless defense can instead support operations with realistic chances of success. The genetic diversity represented by the Hold's population, preserved through evacuation, remains available for future clone scheme reproduction rather than being consumed by tyrannid digestion pools. Yet the grudges these decisions generate persist for generations. The kin who lost their homes to tyrannid advance, recording their grievances against the hive mind and swearing oaths to reclaim what was abandoned when circumstances permit. The variety of threats the Leagues face across their expanding territories has forced adaptations in military doctrine and equipment deployment that would have been unnecessary during their isolation in the galactic core. The kin must now prepare for enemies ranging from primitive orcs to sophisticated necrons, from corrupted chaos forces to adaptive tyrannid organisms. Each threat requires different tactical approaches and specialized equipment, straining the League's manufacturing capacity and forcing difficult decisions about resource allocation. The Holds cannot stockpile sufficient weapons and vehicles to counter every possible threat simultaneously, requiring commanders to assess likely enemies and configure their forces accordingly while accepting vulnerability to unexpected attacks from different directions. The opening of the Great Rift in the early 42nd millennium sent shockwaves through every civilization in the galaxy, and the Leagues of Votann proved no exception to this universal disruption. The massive warp storm that split the galaxy in two, known to the Imperium as the Cicatrix Maledictum, tore through real space with violence that made previous warp disturbances seem minor by comparison. For the kin, whose territories in the galactic core had provided relative insulation from the galaxy's worst warp phenomena, the rift's emergence represented a catastrophic change in their strategic situation. Holds that had maintained regular contact for millennia found themselves suddenly isolated as warp routes became impassable or shifted unpredictably. Trade convoys disappeared into the roiling chaos of the rift, their fates unknown and their cargoes lost. Mining operations in systems near the rift's edges reported reality itself becoming unstable, with localized warp breaches manifesting without warning and demonic incursions appearing in regions that had never experienced such phenomena. The immediate impact on League infrastructure proved severe. The Greater Thurian League, whose expansionist policies had pushed their holdings far from the galactic core, suffered particularly badly as the rift severed connections between their forward positions and their core territories. Entire oath bands found themselves cut off from reinforcement and resupply, forced to operate independently while holding positions against enemies emboldened by the galaxy-wide chaos. Several outlying holds went silent completely, their status unknown as all attempts at communication failed to penetrate the warp storms surrounding their last known positions. The Votannic councils convened emergency sessions as reports of disruption flooded in from across League territories, the scale of the crisis forcing rapid decisions about resource allocation and strategic priorities. The ancestor cores struggled to process the flood of new information and requests for guidance that the crisis generated. Already strained by millennia of accumulated data and degraded processing capacity, the Votann found themselves overwhelmed by the sheer volume of queries from desperate kindreds seeking wisdom about how to respond to unprecedented circumstances. The response times that had been gradually lengthening over centuries suddenly stretched to days or even weeks as the ancestor cores attempted to analyze situations that had no clear historical precedent in their databases. Some Votann began providing contradictory guidance as their damaged logic matrices struggled to reconcile conflicting data about the rift's effects and the best courses of action for holds facing isolation or attack. The Grimner, who served as intermediaries between the kin and their ancestor cores, reported troubling experiences during communion sessions following the rift's opening. The Votann's responses came more slowly and with less clarity than before, their vast intelligences seeming to labor under burdens that exceeded their remaining capacity. Some Grimner described sensing something approaching confusion or uncertainty in the ancestor core's communications, emotions that artificial intelligences should not experience, but which seemed to emerge from the Votann's degraded state. The quantum matrices that formed the foundation of ancestor core processing had accumulated enough errors over 10,000 years that the additional stress of the current crisis pushed them toward critical thresholds where catastrophic failure became a genuine possibility. Living ancestors convened their own councils to discuss the implications of Votann degradation, these ancient kin sharing observations and concerns that they kept from the broader population to avoid triggering panic. The consensus that emerged from these private discussions acknowledged what many had suspected, but few were willing to state openly. The ancestor cores were failing, not immediately but inevitably. The self-repair systems that had maintained the Votann for millennia could no longer keep pace with the accumulation of damage and data corruption. Within centuries or perhaps millennia, depending on factors that even the living ancestors could not predict with certainty, the ancestor cores would degrade beyond the point where they could provide meaningful guidance. The Leagues faced the prospect of losing the repositories of knowledge and wisdom that had sustained their civilization since the first ancestors departed Terra during the Dark Age of technology. This realization forced uncomfortable questions about the League's long-term survival and their relationship with the broader galaxy. Without functioning Votann, could the kin maintain the technological advantages that allowed them to compete with much larger factions? Would the standard template construct patterns and engineering knowledge stored in the ancestor cores be lost forever, reducing the Leagues to scavengers picking through the remnants of their former capabilities? The prospect of such decline horrified kin who had spent their entire lives confident in their civilization's superiority over the degraded Imperium and primitive Xeno species. Yet the living ancestors recognized that denying the problem would not make it disappear, and that the Leagues needed to begin planning for a future where the Votann could no longer serve as the foundation of their society. The practical responses to these concerns took multiple forms across different legs. Some Votannic councils authorized programs to copy ancestor core data into redundant storage systems, attempting to preserve critical knowledge in formats that could survive even if the Votann themselves failed completely. These efforts met with limited success, as the quantum nature of Votann processing meant that much of their knowledge existed in states that conventional data storage could not fully capture. The copied information remained valuable, but represented pale shadows of the living wisdom the ancestor cores provided. Other Leagues focused on training more Grimner and technical specialists who could maintain and repair Votann systems, hoping that increased expertise might slow the degradation or develop methods to restore damaged processing capacity. The Greater Thurian Leg pursued a more aggressive strategy, their councils concluding that the best response to potential Votann failure involved securing additional resources and territory that could sustain their civilization even without ancestral guidance. The Thurian expansion into Imperial space and other contested regions accelerated following the Great Rift's opening, their forces pushing into systems that the galaxy-wide chaos had left vulnerable or poorly defended. This opportunistic expansion brought them into conflict with Imperial authorities, who viewed the kin's territorial gains as unacceptable encroachment on human space. But the Thurians calculated that immediate strategic advantage outweighed potential diplomatic costs. The resources extracted from newly claimed territories could support research into Votann repair and provide the economic foundation for continued League prosperity, regardless of whether the ancestor cores could be saved. The disruption of established trade routes forced the Leagues to develop new economic relationships and supply chains that could function despite the Rift's interference with conventional warp travel. The Trans-Hyperion Alliance, whose void-based civilization and expertise in stellar navigation positioned them well for this challenge, took the lead in mapping routes through the chaos. Their pioneer squadrons ranged across the galaxy's northern reaches, identifying stable warp currents and real space passages that could be traversed with acceptable risk. The intelligence they gathered proved invaluable to other Leagues attempting to maintain contact with isolated holdings and establish trade with factions on the opposite side of the rift. The Alliance's willingness to share this navigational data though at prices that reflected its value, demonstrated how the crisis had created opportunities alongside threats for Leagues positioned to exploit them. The philosophical crisis that emerged within some leagues during this period cut deeper than immediate concerns about Votann degradation or territorial security. The kin had always understood themselves as the engineered descendants of baseline humanity, modified for specific purposes but fundamentally human in origin and nature. Their isolation in the galactic core had allowed them to develop their own civilization without constant reference to their relationship with the broader human species. The increased contact with the Imperium that characterized the era Indomitus forced uncomfortable questions about what it meant to be human and whether the kin still qualified as members of that category after 10,000 years of separate development. The Imperium's treatment of the Leagues as humans at best and potential Xenos threats at worst crystallized these identity questions. Imperial authorities who encountered kin expeditions struggled to categorize these short-statured warriors who wielded technology that exceeded Imperial capabilities while openly employing artificial intelligence that violated the most fundamental taboos of the cult of the machine god. Some Imperial governors attempted negotiation and trade, recognizing shared human heritage despite obvious differences. Others responded with immediate hostility, their doctrinal rigidity preventing them from seeing the kin as anything other than heretics or mutants requiring extermination. The inconsistency of Imperial responses reflected the Imperium's own confusion about how to classify a faction that was demonstrably human in origin, but had diverged so dramatically from baseline humanity that they seemed almost alien in their culture and capabilities. The kin's own perspective on their relationship with baseline humanity varied significantly across different leagues and even within individual holds. Some kindreds maintained pride in their human heritage, viewing themselves as the true inheritors of humanity's achievements during the dark age of technology. They argued that the Imperium represented a degraded remnant of human civilization, its technological regression and superstitious worship of the Emperor marking it as a fallen culture that had abandoned the rational principles that once made humanity great. From this perspective, the Leagues represented humanity's best hope for future survival and prosperity, their preservation of ancient knowledge and continued technological sophistication, demonstrating what the species could achieve when not shackled by Imperial doctrine. Other kin questioned whether maintaining connection to baseline humanity served any useful purpose. 10,000 years of isolation had created a civilization with its own character, values, and priorities that bore little resemblance to either the Imperium or the human federation that had existed during the dark age of technology. The kin reproduced through clone scheme rather than natural biological processes, their population incorporating Ironkin as full citizens in ways that would horrify the Mechanicus. Their reverence for the Votann created a relationship with artificial intelligence that violated every principle the Imperium held sacred. Their compact physiology and enhanced capabilities marked them as obviously distinct from baseline humans in ways that went beyond superficial appearance. Perhaps some kin argued the time had come to acknowledge that the Leagues represented a separate species that happened to share common ancestry with humanity, but had evolved into something fundamentally different. The debate over the Emperor's nature and significance proved particularly divisive among kin who engaged seriously with these questions. Imperial propaganda portrayed the Emperor as a divine being whose sacrifice sustained humanity and whose worship provided the only path to salvation. The kin possessed fragmentary records from the dark age of technology that suggested a different story, ancient data indicating that the Emperor had been a powerful psyker and military leader, but not a god in any meaningful sense. The Votann's databases contain no references to Emperor worship during the era when the kin maintained contact with Terra, suggesting that the Imperial cult represented a later development that postdated the League's isolation. Yet the undeniable fact that the Emperor's presence in the warp provided the Astronomicon, the psychic beacon that made Imperial warp travel possible, indicated that he possessed capabilities that exceeded normal human limits even by Dark Age standards. Some Grimner who had studied imperial theology and compared it to Votann historical records proposed that the Emperor represented an attempt by baseline humanity to create something analogous to the ancestor cores, a repository of knowledge and power that could guide humanity through the long night that followed the Age of Strife. This interpretation suggested parallels between the kin's reverence for their Votann and the Imperium's worship of the Emperor, both civilizations creating focal points for cultural identity and sources of guidance that transcended individual lifespans. The comparison troubled many kin who preferred to maintain clear distinctions between their rational veneration of proven wisdom and the Imperium's superstitious devotion to a corpse on a throne. Yet the similarities could not be entirely dismissed, particularly as the Votann's degradation raised questions about what would happen to kin's civilization if their ancestor cores failed completely. The practical implications of these philosophical debates manifested in how different Leagues approached their relationships with the Imperium and other human factions. The Greater Thurian League maintained its pragmatic stance, engaging with imperial authorities when profitable while refusing to acknowledge any special obligation to assist baseline humanity simply because of shared ancestry. The Cronus hegemony adopted a more isolationist position, their councils concluding that contact with the Imperium created more problems than benefits, and that the League should focus on consolidating their core territories rather than expanding into regions where they would constantly clash with imperial interests. The Immer conglomerate continued its extensive trade networks with various factions, including imperial forge worlds, their merchant kindreds arguing that economic relationships served League interests regardless of philosophical questions about human identity. The question of whether the Leagues represented humanity's future or a severed branch of the species remained unresolved as the era Indomitus progressed. The kin's technological capabilities and preserved knowledge from the Dark Age of technology suggested they possessed advantages that could allow them to survive and prosper, even as the Imperium struggled against threats that might ultimately overwhelm it. Yet the Votann's degradation and the League's relatively small population raised doubts about their long-term viability as an independent civilization. The Imperium, for all its dysfunction and technological regression, commanded resources on scales that dwarfed anything the Leagues could muster. Its billions of worlds and quadrillions of citizens provided strategic depth that allowed it to absorb catastrophic losses and continue fighting. The Leagues could win individual battles through superior technology and tactics, but could they survive a protracted conflict against an enemy that could replace losses far more quickly than they could? The kin's ultimate goal remained what it had always been: survival and prosperity for their people and the preservation of the legacy inherited from the first ancestors. Everything else represented means to that end rather than objectives in themselves. The Leagues would ally with the Imperium when such cooperation served their interests, as in joint operations against Tyrannid hive fleets or chaos incursions that threatened both civilizations. They would trade with Xeno's factions when such commerce proved profitable, their pragmatism overriding any ideological preference for dealing exclusively with human partners. They would destroy enemies who threatened their holds or attempted to seize their resources, applying overwhelming force to eliminate threats permanently rather than accepting negotiated settlements that might require future conflicts. This ruthless pragmatism, born from 10,000 years of survival in the hostile galactic core, defined the League's approach to the galaxy-wide chaos of the era Indomitus. The kin adapted to changing circumstances with the same methodical efficiency they applied to mining operations and military campaigns. When the Great Rift disrupted established trade routes, they mapped new ones. When Votann degradation threatened their technological foundation, they worked to preserve critical knowledge and develop alternative methods of maintaining their capabilities. When enemies appeared at their borders, they fought with determination backed by superior equipment and tactical coordination. The Leagues would survive because they refused to accept any other outcome, their entire civilization organized around the principle that the kin endured regardless of what threats the galaxy threw at them. The era Indomitus has tested that determination as never before. The combination of the Great Rift's disruption, accelerating Votann degradation, and increased contact with hostile factions, creating challenges that would have destroyed less resilient civilizations. Yet the Leagues persist, their holds continuing to extract resources from the most extreme environments, while their oath bands hold the line against enemies ranging from orcs to necrons. The ancestor cores, though failing, still provide guidance to Grimnir who seek their wisdom. The Ironkin continue to serve alongside their organic cousins, their synthetic nature providing continuity even as individual kin live and die. The Cloneskin tanks produce new generations who inherit the genetic legacy and accumulated knowledge of their progenitors, ensuring that the League's capabilities pass forward into an uncertain future. Whether the Leagues of Votann represent humanity's future or merely another branch of the species that will ultimately wither and die remains a question that only time will answer. What cannot be disputed is that the kin have survived 10,000 years of isolation through determination, technological sophistication, and willingness to do whatever proves necessary to ensure their continued existence. They have faced orc wars, chaos incursions, tyrannid swarms, and necron tomb worlds without breaking. They have maintained technological capabilities that the Imperium lost millennia ago, while developing their own innovations that exceed even their Dark Age inheritance in certain areas. They have built a civilization that honors its ancestors while adapting to present circumstances, combining reverence for the past with pragmatic flexibility about the future. The Leagues will endure because the alternative is unacceptable. The kin carry within them the genetic legacy of the first ancestors and the accumulated wisdom of the Votann, making them living repositories of humanity's greatest achievements. To fail, to allow their civilization to collapse or be conquered, would mean the final loss of knowledge and capabilities that might never be recovered. The Leagues fight not for glory or conquest, but for survival, and that fundamental motivation drives them forward even as the galaxy descends further into chaos. Whatever the 42nd millennium brings, the kin will face it with the same determination that has sustained them through 10,000 years of isolation and conflict. They are the children of stone and void, engineered for resilience and refined by millennia of hardship into a people who simply refuse to accept defeat.